Sitting with his back against the door of his room, Sonny stared ahead, his heart empty. He had lived most of his life alone. 1 year ago, he had entered the dream realm alone, and now he was alone again. But not having something was very different from losing it. Now that he knew how precious true friendship and affection were, existing without them felt like torture. It felt like there was a bleeding wound on his soul, left there after he had so cruelly severed the tether connecting him to Cassia, one of the very few people he cared for in this world. Hurting her felt good and justified, but only in that moment. Instead of bringing him some sense of satisfaction or relief, it only brought him more pain. Nevertheless, he did not regret what he had done. Sometimes one had to endure suffering. Sometimes pain was necessary. Now, Sonny was completely alone. So was Cassia, and somewhere deep in the dream realm, Nephis was too. The three of them had done the impossible and paid a heavy price for it. What a mess. Who would have thought that one day he would not only escape the Forgotten Shore, but also become vastly more powerful than he had ever dreamt, only to sit on the floor in a dark room, feeling miserable. With a resentful grimace, Sonny shook his head and sighed. Enough of wallowing in self-pity. He had a lot of things to do. There were a lot of plans to make. The horrors of the Forgotten Shore were now behind him, but new threats already loomed in the distance. He was now at the mercy of another person. Despite the fact that his master was lost in another world with very low chances of ever making it back, Sonny felt that they were fated to meet again. There was no getting around it. He didn't know how to feel about that. He desperately longed for Nephis to return and wished that she would die. His emotions for her were intense, overwhelming, and an absolute mess. Despite all that, Sonny didn't think that she would die. Somehow, he was sure that Nephis would not perish in the dream realm and eventually make it back. Maybe in a few months, maybe in a few years, but she would achieve the impossible once again and return to the real world. The question was, how? Would she travel to the human territory through the Hollow Mountains, or head in another direction? They didn't know much about what surrounded the Forgotten Shore from the east, west, and north. He doubted that those places were better than the horrifying Misty Mountains, though. That doubt was based on one simple fact. There was no information about them, which meant that no human had ever returned from those regions of the dream realm to tell the tale. Although deadly, the Hollow Mountains were at least known to mankind. Chances were Changing Star would choose to try her luck there, instead of venturing into the unknown. Nothing was more dangerous than what you knew nothing about, after all. The unknown. The word bubbled up in Sonny's mind. He frowned. That was another problem he had to face, or rather, an opportunity he would potentially be able to exploit. Due to his fated attribute, Sonny stumbled onto the legacy of a creature named Weaver and got a glimpse into the secrets of the gods. What he saw there left him both terrified and in breathless ecstasy. There was a boundless mystery hiding in the ruined land of dreams and nightmares, a tapestry that connected the dead gods, the unknown, the demons, and the nightmare spell. The former rulers of the dream realm were gone, but the spell remained, and humanity, including Sonny himself, had now become an unwilling part of that tapestry through it. Sonny's most ardent desire was to control his own fate, and he couldn't achieve that without more knowledge. Now that he knew what to look for, he had to deepen his understanding of the fate of the gods and the origins of the spell. Who knew? Maybe that was where the keys to his freedom were hidden. And then, there were the sovereigns. His face grew dark.
Honestly, why is everything so complicated?
Why couldn't he just open a memory store, become wealthy and fat, and live peacefully ever after? That was his plan all along. However, the recent revelations made Sonny doubt the validity of such plans. Judging from what Castor had said, there were some figures hiding in the shadows, ruling over the human world. And not only were they there, but Sonny was also, apparently, unwillingly doing their bidding. He still remembered the warning Nephis had given him once. She told him that there were words that could get him killed simply if he learned of their existence. Well, now he knew a lot of those words. Sovereigns, domains, lineage memories. Was he going to pretend to know nothing and hope that those powerful beings would not turn their gaze to him one day? Or was he going to do something to prepare for the day they do? Did he even have a choice? Knowing what he did, with his fate hopelessly entangled with that of Changing Star, who was embroiled in these clandestine machinations just by virtue of her birth.
So bothersome.
What was he supposed to do? What was the plan of action? Sonny sighed. Well, it was simple, or at least he knew what he needed to do first. He had to learn as much as he could about the Sovereigns, but in a way that would never lead back to him. Explore the past of the Dream Realm to gain insight into the demons, the gods, and the unknown. But first and foremost, grow stronger. Much, much stronger. When Nephis returned, he had to be ready for the worst. Sonny didn't think the Changing Star he knew would abuse her power over him. In fact, he was almost sure that she wouldn't, not only because of the bond between them, but also because in Neph's warped mind, doing so would simply be beneath her. But after going through the Dream Realm alone, and him being the one to trap her there, would he recognize the woman that she returned as? Would that be beneath her anymore? He wasn't going to let his hope prevent him from creating contingencies. If she ever decided to truly make him a slave, one of them was going to die. Standing up, Sonny walked over to the desk and wrote on a piece of synthetic paper, 0 out of 2,000. Then he summoned the runes, glanced at them, and added a second string of numbers. 2,749 out of 3,000. The runes shimmered and changed before he was done writing. The number of soul essences grew bigger. Sonny stared at the runes for a few seconds, then corrected the number. Then, he put the pen down and looked at the piece of paper in front of him. In one, shadow essences, 0 out of 2,000, and 2,773 out of 3,000 soul essences.
All right.
So, this was it. This was the plan. From now on, this was his life's goal. The initial series of tests, the interview with the government specialists, the somber conversation with Cassia, and the hours Sonny had spent pondering about his past, present, and future, took up almost an entire day. A new dawn was already bathing the world in soft sunlight, which Sonny knew because one of the walls in his underground room was made into a false window, with a vista of one of the parks in the academy being projected onto it from a remote camera. He was experiencing mild mental fatigue and was not sleepy at all, at least not yet. Truly, the physique of an awakened was much more resilient than that of a mundane human. If he was his old self, he would barely be able to walk straight, much less get out of bed and face the day. There were still a few things he had to do. In all the turmoil of the past 24 hours, he had not even gotten a chance to take a proper look at his memories. Sonny was about to summon the runes when, suddenly, there was a knock on his door. He flinched.
What? Who can it be?
He wondered. For a moment, a mental picture of Effie and Kai appeared in his mind, but then he dismissed it. The two of them must have been busy after their awakening as he was. Much more busy, most likely, considering that they probably had friends and families to deal with, too, on top of everything else. With them being in different facilities, coming to the academy just to pay him a visit was not a likely scenario. Certainly not that soon, at least. Hiding one of the shadows on his body to appear like a normal person, Sonny walked to the door and opened it. Standing there was a striking, confident woman in her late 20s. Immediately, it seemed as though the temperature inside the room dropped by a couple of degrees. She had short, raven black hair and icy blue eyes. Her flawless skin was smooth, supple, and as white as snow. The woman was dressed in a dark blue uniform with silver epaulets and black leather boots. The jacket of the uniform was casually unbuttoned, revealing a rather form-fitting tank top.
Shit. What are you staring at, awakened sunless?
Sonny looked up with wide eyes.
Master Jet, I was just, appreciating your fashion sense.
Indeed, it was Soul Reaper Jet, the Ascended who worked for the government and had welcomed him back to the real world after his first nightmare. Sonny had sometimes thought about this beautiful woman during his journey into the dream realm, not only because the 3 pieces of advice Master Jet had given him ended up saving his life on multiple occasions, but also because she was from the outskirts, just like him. Knowing that someone as unfortunate as that had managed to not only survive, but even thrive in the ruthless reality of the nightmare spell, had given fuel to his determination, as well as providing vital perspective. But what was she doing at his door? Sonny studied Master Jet, suddenly full of doubt. She looked exactly as she had a year ago, the only difference being that her uniform had more wrinkles, and there were now dark circles under her eyes. As he watched, she grinned.
My fashion sense, huh? Why, thank you. If you want, I can introduce you to my tailors. You'll have to sign a few thick contracts to receive a comfy suit such as this, though.
Sonny forced out a smile.
I see. Those tailors are slightly out of my price range, I'm afraid. But thanks for the offer.
After a short pause, he cautiously asked,
Master Jet, it's very nice to see you again, but to what do I owe the pleasure? I am sure that you are too busy to visit every random returnee.
She looked at him for a couple of seconds, then suddenly yawned and shook her head to chase away sleepiness.
Correct. But since there's some procedure you still have to go through and we already know each other, I thought that I'd do the honors.
With that, she looked around the deserted corridor of the hospital complex with a dubious expression, lingered for a couple of seconds, and then asked,
"Wanna eat?"
Moments later, the two of them were walking through the ground level of the Academy Hospital. Sonny had thought that Master Jet would take him to the cafeteria there, but instead, she headed toward the exit.
Where are we going? I thought that the cafeteria was this way.
She looked at him with confusion, then grimaced slightly.
Hospital food? No thanks. Let me take you to the instructor's lounge. That's where they keep the really good stuff.
Sonny coughed.
But, Master Jet, you're not an instructor.
She smiled, then pointed to the 3-star insignia on her left sleeve.
Technically, I'm not, but the Academy is a government facility, so I outrank most of the people here. What are they going to do?
He blinked a couple of times, then shrugged. As they exited the hospital complex and walked across the Academy grounds, Sonny couldn't help but throw furtive glances at the confident young woman, not because he was mesmerized by her, but because seeing her again was a strange experience. Back when they first met, he was just fresh from the first nightmare, barely accustomed to his new status as a sleeper. Being in the presence of a master was like standing in front of a legend. He remembered vividly how much fear and awe she had inspired in him. and how acutely he felt the measure of ease with which she would be able to kill him if she wished. All it would take was a flick of her finger. Now, slightly more than a year later, so much had changed. He was still pretty sure that he had no chance of taking her in a fight. A fair one, at least. But the reverent fear was gone, replaced by simple respect. Sonny knew that he had it in himself to, if not win, then at least survive a confrontation with someone like Jet. In a sense, he was now half a legend himself. As he thought about how different things had become, the two of them approached a small, picturesque building near the center of the academy. Without slowing down, Master Jet walked past a few people who were staring at her with a strange mix of regard and disdain, and entered the instructor's lounge. Sonny looked at their expressions, and then it dawned on him.
Oh, right, he thought. I remember Teacher Julius mentioning that she has a terrible reputation. Didn't he describe her as a murderous savage, barbarian, having a problematic personality, and psychopathic killer?
No wonder people were giving them weird looks throughout the whole walk. For some reason, Sonny felt annoyed. Maybe because Jet was someone he knew, or maybe because she used to be an outskirt rat just like him, but he found himself feeling protective.
Stare away, bastards. See if we give a damn.
Master Jet clearly didn't, so why should he? Sonny looked at the next person to give her a dirty glance coldly. Immediately, the onlooker paled slightly and turned away. Sonny smiled.
That's right, look away. Now, the most important part. Let's see what the instructors eat.
At first glance, the instructor's lounge interior seemed simple and cozy. Most of the furniture was made of wood, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. Bright sunlight streamed through the tall windows, opened slightly to let in the chilly winter air. However, his eyes widened slightly when Sonny realized all the wood around him was natural, not synthetic.
Oh, extravagant, wasteful.
Noticing his expression, Master Jet smiled slightly.
Let me guess, you've never seen that much real wood in one place?
Sonny hesitated, then gave her a nod.
Only in the dream realm.
The young woman grinned, moved a chair back with her foot, and sat at one of the tables.
Where do you think all of this came from?
He looked around, seeing the Academy Instructor's Lounge from a completely new perspective, and then silently sat down, lost for words. Master Jet summoned the menu, made a selection, then leaned back and tiredly rubbed her face.
Believe it or not, the chair you're sitting on is made out of a dead titan.
Sonny stared at her, shocked. Suddenly, he had a strong impulse to jump out of the chair.
What?
She chuckled and gestured around.
All of this, actually, back when Bastion was first established, it was surrounded by a vast and very hungry forest. The whole thing was one giant nightmare creature. Clan Valor spent decades at war with it, losing many knights. In the end, the forest was destroyed, leaving behind a lot of high-quality lumber. And here we are.
Sonny scratched the back of his head, then cautiously knocked on the wooden table. The thing seemed dead, but he decided to remain alert, just in case. It had once been part of a titan after all. Soon, their food arrived. Sonny half expected for it to be delivered by an actual echo, but luckily it was brought by a mundane automated server. Taking his plates off the motorized tray, Sonny stared at the feast in front of him with wild eyes. There were fried potatoes, baked beans, juicy roasted meat, a salad made out of real vegetables, a bowl of fragrant soup, several pieces of oven bread, butter, jam, and even chocolate pudding for dessert. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. It was also his first time seeing some of these things in real life. Suddenly, the position of a research assistant once promised to him by Teacher Julius did not seem so unattractive.
Please, excuse me.
Master Jet waved at him and concentrated on her own food. Not wasting any time on manners, Sunny assaulted his breakfast with the same level of ferocity as when battling nightmare creatures. Sometime later, with his belly on the verge of bursting open, he pushed away empty plates and leaned back with a satisfied smile on his face.
This is life.
Master Jet glanced at him with a dry smile.
What did I tell you? This is where they hide the good stuff.
Sunny looked at the empty plates with regret and sighed.
Yeah, although after a year of eating almost nothing except for monster meat, I would have been satisfied even by synth paste.
Her smile dimmed at the mention of the most common food on the outskirts. As 2 glasses of beautiful dark tea steamed in front of them, Master Jet sighed, then took out something from the inner pocket of her uniform. It was a small metal box with a sensor on its lid. Placing the box on the table, she looked at Sunny.
You must be wondering why I visited you, right?
Sunny tilted his head, stared at the metal box for a few seconds, and then answered in a cautious tone.
Yes, to be honest, I'm very curious.
She nodded, then smiled reassuringly.
Don't be nervous. It's just a formality, and a very beneficial one at that. Put your finger on the sensor.
He hesitated, then did as she had told. The sensor buzzed for half a minute, and then a small green light ignited on the metal box. With a quiet click, it unlocked. Master Jet opened the box and took out several objects. A slick communicator made out of flexible glass, a memory chip with the government seal etched on its surface, and a small iron badge with 2 stars engraved into it. Pushing them toward Sunny, she lingered for a moment and then said in a light tone,
Congratulations, Awakened Sunless. You are now officially a citizen, of the 7th rank, no less.
Her words struck Sunny like a hammer. Silent, he stared at the 3 objects in front of him, his face not betraying even a hint of emotion. A citizen. Back in the outskirts, people lived and died dreaming of becoming one of the true citizens. That simple word hid so much meaning. Access to proper food, human rights, and a better life. To all the things that none of them really had. To have a future. Very few of these people had ever gotten the chance to hear the word citizen in connection to their name. Being poor and lowly only led to becoming destitute and falling to the bottom. It rarely led to rising higher, let alone soaring to the peak. And here he was, not only becoming a citizen, but even jumping over all the steps and arriving at the very pinnacle of the social hierarchy in one go. Not just a citizen, and not even one of high rank, but of the highest.
7th rank? There's literally nothing higher.
Finally, his expression changed, becoming grim. Looking up at Master Jet, he asked in a somber tone,
I get it that I would be made a citizen after awakening, but 7th rank? Isn't that a little too much?
Master Jet laughed.
Sunless, you don't really know what you did, do you?
Sunny looked at her without humor, then said,
I'm pretty sure that I do, but please, enlighten me.
She shook her head and sighed.
Listen, of all the sleepers that had returned from the Dream Realm in the last few years, there's only 5 whose files were marked as SS, and you are one of them.
Sunny stared at Master Jet, a strange expression frozen on his face.
That's great, but what the hell does SS mean?
She smiled and sipped her tea, looking at him across the table. Placing the cup back down, she then shook her head slightly.
The government, and the powerful legacy clans, of course, keeps track of every awakened in the world. That shouldn't be a surprise to you, right?
Sonny slowly nodded.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Master Jet shifted slightly.
Firstly, every awakened technically has a duty to respond when a gate opens near their location. That's what the special communicator is for. In exchange for all the privileges we receive, we have to protect this world from the nightmare creatures.
A dark grimace appeared on her face.
Of course, realistically, no one can force you to actually fulfill that duty, or at least no one is going to. Many awakened turn around and run as soon as they receive a gate crisis alert.
Sonny grimaced. On the one hand, he understood such a reaction perfectly. Why would they want to risk their lives for random strangers? Not every awakened was good in a fight, too. Not everyone was like the artisans of the Dark City who had gone into battle alongside those dreamers who possessed combat aspects. But on the other hand, the idea of running away while monsters were devouring mundane humans and wreaking havoc in the real world simply rubbed him the wrong way. It seemed as though Sonny had somehow developed a bit of pride in the past year. He didn't want to run from the nightmare creatures and capitulate to the spell. He might have even been infected with having morals.
Better squish this lunacy fast.
Oblivious to his thoughts, Master Jet continued.
Secondly, newly awakened are monitored because everyone wants to recruit the best of them. Talents need to be nurtured, and for that, they need to be recognized first. So the most promising awakened receive a mark on their file. Usually it's SA or simply S. Do you know what that means?
Sonny shook his head. She grinned.
SA means strategic asset. There's not a lot of awakened who are considered to be important enough to be assigned that designation. Having one means that you are viewed as a person who can potentially be important to the very survival of humanity, or at least make an impact on the global scale. Simply put, it's either someone whose aspect can be extremely useful to society, or someone who has a high chance of becoming a master, maybe even a saint.
Master Jet took another sip of tea and then gestured lazily at herself.
Like me. Not to brag, but people with the S designation are few and far between. That's why we usually receive a lot of attention and support from either the government or the legacy faction we decide to align with. But here comes the best part.
She grinned.
Currently, everyone is running around and foaming at their mouths because of you guys. All 100 of those who returned from the Forgotten Shore were marked as strategic assets. That is an unprecedented event in human history. A sudden appearance of 100 powerful awakened is not that important in the grand scheme of things. But if those awakened all have a very high chance of becoming masters, maybe even saint, that would be enough to completely shatter the current status quo.
Sonny stared at her, thinking. Until now, everything that he heard was in accordance with how he had imagined things.
I get it. However, what's that about me being marked as SS? What does SS stand for?
Master Jet nodded.
I was about to explain. Above those marked as strategic assets, there are those marked as special strategic assets, SSA or SS for short. This designation is even rarer. Actually, very few people had ever gotten it. What it means is that you are considered to have a very high chance of becoming a saint. You know how rare Transcendent are, right? So, of course, everyone now wants to be your friend. including the government. Hence the 7th-ranked citizen status.
She looked at him with an apologetic smile.
Granted, out of the 5 people with the SS designation, you are the least outstanding. No offense.
Sonny glanced at her and smiled slightly.
None taken. Who are the other 4?
Master Jet shrugged.
3 of them are the only ones who received true names from the spell after leaving the Forgotten Shore. Awakened Athena, Awakened Kai, and Awakened Cassia. The 4th one is Awakened Shan, who is, well, from one of the great clans. To be honest, your own achievements, well, still incredible, pale in comparison to theirs. But someone had noted that you went from being the second to last in the Academy rating to leading 100 sleepers to the gateway during the last leg of the journey. You are seen as someone with great growth potential, in short.
He nodded, somewhat satisfied by that answer.
It's not as bad as I thought.
Actually, it was perfect. It was exactly the result he had hoped for. To be considered one of the best, but also the worst of the best. He needed status to receive all the best opportunities in this world. He needed to have value. Looking at the beautiful Ascended in front of him, Sonny took a sip of the tea, then smiled brightly.
So, that sounds really great. A great honor and so on. But what I really want to know is, what exactly can I get thanks to being the 5th most incredible person of an entire generation?
Master Jet laughed and glanced at him with approval.
Good. Straight to the point. Well, that depends. What is it that you want the most?
Sonny didn't hesitate.
To be free.
The smile disappeared from her face. Looking down at her tea, Master Jet lingered for a while.
Then you are out of luck. I am sorry, but freedom is just a myth, Sunless. No one is free in this world. Mundane humans have to toil and struggle to remain alive. Even if they are fortunate enough to reach the height of success and acquire great wealth, their lives still belong to the Awakened who protect them from the nightmare creatures. But the Awakened, we are not free too. Our lives belong to the spell.
She paused, then added with slight sadness.
If we want to survive its trials, we need to tether ourselves to others, be it powerful clans or the government or even just the members of our cohort. We have to depend on our allies and companions, and they, in turn, have to depend on us. All of us are chained to one another, Sunless, and that is the only way we can survive. So, think again about what you want. Think carefully.
Sonny stared at her for a long time, his eyes full of dark, deep, heavy emotion. After a while, he sighed slowly.
If that is the case, then I want to be strong.
Master Jet looked at him for a while, then smiled.
Perfect. That is a good goal to have, especially for people like us.
She took a sip of tea, then closed her eyes for a few moments.
All right. There are many ways to become strong, some more straightforward than others. Ideally, you would want a powerful organization backing you up, but that is not the only way. In fact, such a partnership tends to be a double-edged sword. You gain a lot, but also have to give a lot in return. I'll provide you with the basic information, and you can decide for yourself.
Sonny straightened a little and listened to her attentively. Master Jet thought for a few seconds and then continued.
In the next few days, you will have to decide what citadel to go to. That is not the same as joining a faction, but it may as well be. Usually, young Awakened have to compete for the right to join a desirable faction, and therefore be taken to the citadel it operates from. Your case is different, though. Everyone wants you, and I mean everyone. So you can pick any of the human citadels in the Dream Realm to call home.
She paused, yawned, and then continued.
As you should already know, there are 3 great human citadels in the Dream Realm, as well as many smaller ones. The primary citadels belong to the great clans, while the smaller ones can be either ruled by a lesser clan or remain independent. Regardless, all of them are situated around the 3 main human enclaves and tied to them in one form or another. No matter where you go, you'll be in the sphere of influence of one of the great clans. It's just that you can be either in its center, close to the center, or on the periphery.
Sonny scratched his head.
What about the government? Doesn't the government control many citadels?
Master Jet shook her head.
Out there in the Dream Realm, the government has less influence than the great clans. It does, however, maintain a presence in all the important citadels, which allows us to play a unique role. In the Dream Realm, we serve as a connective tissue between the 3 factions, I guess. That flexibility has its own benefits, if you ask me.
She knocked lightly on the table and said,
In any case, even if you decide to refuse the obvious choice of settling in one of the great citadels, you'll have to select one of the 3 territories. They are not connected, as some people think. There are deadly and extremely hazardous regions separating each of the human dominions from each other. So, that is going to be your first decision. Which territory to choose?
That made sense. If Sonny chose to go to Bastion, for example, he would have the opportunity to build a relationship with the great clan Valor, which ruled it, or any of the lesser clans in its sphere of influence. He would lose the opportunity to be recruited into the great clan Song, though, or any other clan that existed in a separate human territory, and so on. Master Jet finished her tea and looked at the empty cup with a solemn expression.
Oh yeah. This is where I was supposed to give you the recruitment speech and try to convince you to join the government forces. But I'm not going to. You are smart enough to figure out the pros and cons of that path by yourself. All I will say is that you will never be truly accepted as an equal by the members of the legacy clans, SS designation or not. Maybe they won't say it to your face, but you'll always be treated as someone a tiny bit less, at best.
Sonny's expression darkened. Castor's face suddenly appeared in his mind, eyes full of disdain. What had the proud scion called him? A mongrel?
Well, that mongrel got to your throat. Who's laughing now?
Master Jet had a similar kind of expression on her face. Had she experienced her own share of hardships because of her lowly background? Most likely. As Sonny was pondering what Master Jet's path to becoming an Ascended must have looked like, she sighed, then gave a sardonic smile.
Not that entering a legacy clan is a bad deal. Actually, it's a dream come true for many. Most, even. With your renown, Sunless, any clan would be happy to give you patronage. Some might even adopt you. Hell, with your looks, even marriage is not out of the question.
As Sonny choked on his tea and did an actual spit take, Master Jet laughed.
Marriage? What marriage?
She shook her head.
How do you think legacy clans recruit talents? There are patronage contracts, adoptions, and matrimony, the latter being the preferred method when it comes to true gems. Anything to enhance the bloodline, you know. As Sonny stared at her with wide eyes, Master Jet chuckled and continued. In any case, these are your options. You can go with the government, one of the 3 great clans, or a lesser clan. Each will provide you with plenty of incentives to join them instead of others. The most wealthy factions will even shower you with soul shards. You and I both know how important those are. Few people can refuse such an offer. She sighed wistfully, lingered for a bit, and then added, "Of course, you can also remain independent. In that case, you won't have any special support outside of the usual benefits of being a highly regarded awakened, be it in the form of training, resources, or access. But you also won't be tied down by any obligations, free to travel around the dream realm as you wish, making a living by hunting nightmare creatures or providing useful services to your citadel of choice. There are plenty of independent awakened out there, although few are truly successful. It's a tough way to live." Sonny rubbed his temples, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the cornucopia of choices in front of him. He had no need for soul shards, but being showered in them still seemed like a great experience. Master Jet grinned. "So, what do you think?" He hesitated for a while, then replied, "I don't know. That's a lot to take in. I'll have to think about many things before making a decision." She nodded, as though that was an expected answer. "Good. Nothing good can come from rushing such a matter." With that, Master Jet took a small, secure plastic container out of her pocket and pushed it to Sonny. He looked at it and raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She shrugged. "A pack of military-grade stimulants to keep you awake for a while. Don't use more than one patch at a time. Wait, why am I explaining this to you? You're from the outskirts, so your knowledge of stimulant use must be extensive. In any case, with that, you'll be able to stay lucid for about a week. Contact me when you're ready to make a decision, and I'll arrange the rest. Oh, also feel free to call me if you have any questions. Scratch that. Not any questions, just important ones." She stood up, stretched a little, and gave him a little smile. "Well, it's been nice seeing you, awakened sunless. You did well, staying alive out there. Warms my little heart to know that another one of us did." She turned around to walk away, but Sonny stopped her. Master Jet." She turned back to him and raised an eyebrow. "Yeah?" Sonny chewed his lip, looking for the right words, not wanting to sound desperate. Then he raised his newly issued expensive slick communicator. I don't have your contact." Master Jet stared at him for a while, then grinned. "Want to get my number, huh?" Feeling his ears turning slightly red, Sonny coughed, but then took hold of himself and said with an easy smile, "Yes? How else am I going to call you when I've made a decision?" The beautiful woman shook her head, then took his communicator and entered her contact information into it. Returning the communicator to Sonny, she looked at him and said, "Can't wait to hear from you, awakened sunless. See you later then." With a wink, Master Jet walked away, leaving Sonny alone at the table. Looking around, he sat in silence for a while. Finally, he said quietly, "I wonder, can I get another of everything I ate? That'd be great." Sometime later, Sonny exited the instructor's lounge. The clear winter day welcomed him with chilly wind and tiny snowflakes dancing in the sunlight. Despite being dressed very lightly, his skin was covered only by the soft fabric of the simple training suit provided to him by the staff of the Academy Hospital complex. Sonny did not feel too cold. He gave a small smile, thinking, "That's being awakened for you, I guess." If it had been a year and a few months ago, he would have been desperately searching for shelter, hoping that he would not freeze to death overnight or, even worse, get sick. But now, Sonny felt great. He wasn't even uncomfortable. Pulling down his sleeves to hide the serpent tattoo, he inhaled the cool, perfectly filtered air, smiled, and started walking. His mind was spinning. Decisions. The conversation with Master Jet had been useful, but left him with more questions than answers. Each of the choices presented to him had alluring benefits,
but also very serious drawbacks.
Great clans, lesser clans, government, or independent?
Sonny tried to imagine himself as a legacy and silently shook his head. All that prestige, all that wealth, the admiration of the masses. Being a legacy meant being a part of the nobility, the elite above all elites. It was the exact opposite of what Sonny had been all his life. But who said that he had to remain the same in the future? From a pauper to a prince, that would be a nice transformation. Lord Sunless, that had a nice ring to it, didn't it? He smiled at the thought, but his smile faltered. There were serious disadvantages to making such a choice, of course. Working for the government offered its advantages, but at the cost of not receiving as many funds or resources while being tied down by too many obligations. Both times Sonny had met Master Jet, she seemed busy and overworked. He couldn't imagine pursuing his goals with such a schedule. One of the functions of the awakened forces in service to the government was hunting down rogue members of their own kind. Awakened were still people, and there were criminals among them too. So many were traumatized and driven to the edge of madness by their experiences in the nightmares and the dream realm. If Sonny could absorb the essence of those humans he killed like all the other awakened, that path could have offered him a faster track to saturating his cores. But as it was, he didn't see himself putting on the uniform. Unless there were new gates opening every day, thus providing him with an endless supply of nightmare creatures to hunt. By the way, how many gates were opening in a given year on average? Suddenly, Sonny realized that he had no idea. The propaganda never mentioned concrete numbers, only the fact that Valiant Awakened had the situation under control. Did they? The last option was to remain independent. That choice was seemingly in contradiction to his desire to acquire status and as many benefits as possible. But only on the surface. Sonny had already received most of what he wanted by becoming a high-ranking citizen and getting a free pick of any citadel. Of course, not having the vast resources of a legacy clan or the government would be a huge loss, but it would also provide the best chance he had to keep all his secrets to himself. All three options were worthy of being considered. In the end, it all came to the fact that he simply didn't have enough information to make a decision, so getting information was his first priority. But how? Where's the library? The Academy has to have one of those, right? Sonny, of course, had never been to a library, but he was familiar with the concept. There were similar types of public terminals in the outskirts too, although using them cost credits. He had never had any to spare, so his visits were few and far between, and he went there for entertainment, not to study. Now that Sonny had himself a state-of-the-art communicator, he could access a lot of information from the network, but doing so would doubtlessly leave a digital trail behind. Considering that some of the topics he wanted to research were rather dangerous, he wanted to remain as anonymous as possible. 10 minutes later, he approached a square white building. Like most of the Academy, its walls were made out of smooth, pristine alloy, with wide windows that could be covered at any moment with reinforced shutters. There weren't many people in sight, so Sonny assumed that the library was not a popular destination among the awakened. Why would it be, if most of the information stored there could be accessed remotely? He was the weirdo for coming here in person. Entering through the automatic door, Sonny looked around and blinked a couple of times. Everywhere he looked, tall shelves full of paper books stretched into the distance. Between them stood tables meant for study, with several young men and women reading behind them silently. Most of them were using terminals to take notes, but some were actually writing by hand. What the hell is this? All those books, of course, were printed on synthetic paper. But why have them printed at all? Wouldn't it be way more convenient to read them from a terminal? like all normal people did? He had never seen a physical book in his life. The very idea of using one was mind-boggling. But it made sense. Digital data storage technology was highly advanced but susceptible to various types of damage. During the dark times, which came before the even darker times of the nightmare spell, back when humanity had been consumed by an endless series of devastating wars and cataclysmic natural disasters, a lot of knowledge had been lost due to the over-reliance on digital mediums. Whole layers of culture were irrevocably lost as a result. Paper was still the safest way to preserve knowledge. It's just Sonny had never thought about it before. Trying to not show his confusion, Sonny furtively looked around and noticed a member of the library staff. It was a young man. No, wait, a young woman? A young person with short black hair and intelligent brown eyes was currently reading a vintage-looking book. There was a badge on their chest with the name Wren written on it. At least Sonny thought that it was a name. Maybe it was some weird title among the librarians. Who knew what kind of strange customs they had here? Approaching the young librarian, he stopped a couple of meters away and waited patiently to be noticed. However, Wren continued to read, fully engrossed in whatever story the book told, eyes full of deep emotion. Curious, Sonny looked at the title on the cover. Free Fall. Sounds familiar. Must be a really great book. Maybe I should read it someday. He cleared his throat. Hey, can I get some directions? Wren lingered for a couple of seconds, then reluctantly put down the novel and looked at him with a neutral smile. Of course. How can I help you? He lingered for a bit, then said with uncertainty, How can I read about the Dream Realm and the current state of human expansion into its various regions? Wren blinked a couple of times, then asked politely, Can you be more specific? Sonny sighed. I want to see a map and a list of all the citadels out there, as well as learn who owns what and why, I guess. The librarian smiled brightly. Ah, you are a lover of history as well. Of course, of course. You've come to the right place. We have all the records you'll ever need here. Nickel! Sonny flinched. Nickel? What does nickel mean? What is happening? Suddenly, another young librarian appeared out of nowhere. This one was a young man, wearing a wrinkled white shirt and a brown vest. He was tall and handsome, with slightly disheveled red hair, scruffy bristle on his chin, and a friendly face. There was a badge on his vest, too, with the word Nickel written on it. The two were a strange pair. Nickel, could you please escort this young man to the Dream Realm history section? The tall librarian glanced at Sonny and gave him a wide smile. Sure, please follow me. They headed into the depths of the library, leaving Wren behind. A few moments later, Sonny heard the rustle of paper pages coming from behind him. The smaller librarian was once again engrossed in their book. Nickel led him through the library, asking a few questions to narrow down the search. Soon, they arrived in front of a particular set of shelves, full of books having to do with the Dream Realm and the history of humanity's slow exploration of it. The young man helped Sonny select a few, wished him luck, and disappeared as quietly and swiftly as he had appeared. Sonny looked at the spot where Nickel had been just a few moments ago, then slowly shook his head. A librarian? Damn, that guy could have been an assassin instead. Well, maybe he was. Come to think about it, working in a library could be a perfect cover for clandestine operators. Who knew what they were like outside of work, much less in the Dream Realm? Maybe I should become a librarian too. Making sure that no one was watching him, Sonny put his books on a nearby table and walked back to the shelves. There, he stared at a certain book that he had noticed a few minutes ago. Its title was short, The Immortal Flame. Sonny pulled it from the shelf. He was pretty sure that the Sovereigns were at least partially responsible for the fall of Nephis' clan. If so, there had to be some hints of their identity in the history of the Immortal Flame. It was a good place to start. Sonny brought the book back to the table and sat down. Looking at the plain cover, his brows furrowed. He knew a few things about the Immortal Flame clan. Everybody did, considering how prominent the achievements of its members were. Even though Sonny missed out on receiving a proper education, he was still aware of Nephis' family. The legendary figures of Changing Star's father and grandfather had long ago found their way from the pages of history into popular culture. Their names were synonymous with heroism and the indomitable nature of the human spirit, famously painted with a tinge of tragedy. Immortal Flame was the first awakened to become a master, and Broken Sword, his son-in-law, was the first master to become a saint. Of course, they had not done so alone. Each had a group of powerful companions to share the burden of challenging the spell. They were the leaders of the first cohorts to conquer the second and third nightmares. However, the names of their comrades were not as well known. Sonny was sure that kids learned about them in school, but a street rat like him only had a general impression of who they were. Mostly, he just remembered that some of them would go on to establish the other great clans. But that was the thing about heroes. Sonny had once told Effie that one had to die to become a hero, and that was not a joke. A person could possess renown and respect for achieving something incredible, but it was the act of making the ultimate sacrifice that elevated one to hero status. That's why the Immortal Flame clan was revered much more than the other great clans, not only because the leaders of those cohorts came from it, but also because it met epic and tragic ends. Or was it? If Nephis did manage to return to the real world, the flame of her clan would burn bright once again, perhaps even brighter than before. The survivors of the Dreamer army already treated her like a deity. With a frown, Sonny awkwardly opened the book and started reading. Accustomed to reading off a screen, he struggled for a bit with the printed text, but quickly got used to it. Soon, he was engrossed in the illustrious history of the famed clan. The first part was dedicated to Immortal Flame himself, and although it was interesting, there was not a lot of information there that Sonny could use. He already knew that Neff's grandfather had been among the first wave of people infected by the nightmare spell, and that he fought against the nightmare creatures during the initial mayhem that followed its appearance. Back then, millions of people were suddenly thrust into the first nightmares and died, resulting in millions of nightmare creatures entering the real world. Of course, almost all of them were only of the dormant rank, but even that turned out to be too much for the armies of the already reeling humanity to handle. Whole nations were destroyed, and for a while, the planet was submerged into absolute chaos. It was only thanks to people like Immortal Flame, who had not yet earned his true name back then, that the situation changed. Some had survived the first nightmare, then entered the dream realm and carved their path to gateways. After returning to the real world, they united and fought back against the tide of nightmare creatures, eventually establishing a new world order. The one that existed to this day. They were tough people, Sonny thought. Becoming an awakened was hard, even today, with all the accumulated knowledge about the spell being freely accessible to everyone. Back when it first appeared, people like Immortal Flame didn't even know what was happening. They didn't know what an aspect was, how many ranks and classes of the nightmare creatures there were, what they meant, what the memories and echoes were, what a gateway was. Most important of all, they didn't even know if saving humanity was even possible. And yet, somehow, they learned and fought back. Sonny couldn't imagine how dark and hellish that time must have been. Truly, they deserved his respect. But sadly, they didn't deserve his time. At least not now. He had much more pressing things on his plate. So Sonny just skimmed through the pages describing Immortal Flame's life, his eventual triumph over the second nightmare, and his heroic death. The legendary master died defending the evacuating cities from the onslaught of terrible creatures that entered the real world through a Category 5 gate. That happened just a year or so before Sonny was born, and had cost humanity an entire continent. It was also the event that led to Nephis' mother becoming hollow, although that tragedy was not described in the book in great detail. All that was said about it was that Smile of Heaven died during the disaster while protecting civilians. Sonny sighed, then concentrated on reading about Broken Sword. Nephis' father was not a legacy by birth. He came from a very humble background and rose from absolute obscurity to the very pinnacle of prominence, thanks only to his talent and battle genius. He was a pauper who had won the heart of a princess and became the heir of the most venerated clan in human history. The narrative of the book framed the history in a way that suggested that Broken Sword had been heartbroken by the death of his wife, and that it was this loss that drove him to rise even higher and challenge the third nightmare. Miraculously, Broken Sword succeeded, becoming the first saint. There was no happy end to his story, though. Just a few years later, he perished in the Dream Realm while exploring a region that would later be categorized as a death zone. The book ended with a long-winded tribute to the two legendary heroes and an explanation of how important their contributions were to the survival and future prosperity of the human race. Sonny closed the book and shook his head.
What a load of crap.
He might not have been educated, but like most people in the outskirts, Sonny had the instinctive skill of recognizing propaganda and reading between the lines of official statements. And this was what the book was, an embellished, partially fictional version of events that the government liked to feed to people. The truth was hard to come by. There were several things about the supposed history of the Immortal Flame clan that didn't make a lot of sense to Sonny. The first one was the circumstances of Smile of Heaven's tragic death. On paper, everything seemed fine, but Sonny knew that she was not, in fact, dead. Not in the traditional sense of the word, at least. She was hollow. But how could she become hollow? According to the book, at that point in time, Broken Sword had already become a master. The two of them were partners both in life and in battle, leading their cohort together. That would suggest that Smile of Heaven was a master too. But masters traveled to the Dream Realm physically, as opposed to in spirit like Sleepers and Awakened did. There would have been no soulless body left behind if she had died there. So, how was it possible?
The timeline doesn't add up.
The second questionable point was Broken Sword's own death. Saints were extremely powerful beings, and killing one was not an easy task. Even when met with an overwhelming foe, a saint should have been able to at least escape. Saints simply did not die unless they had a reason to stand their ground and fight to the last breath. The only creatures that could kill them instantly were too powerful and rare to stumble on one randomly, even when exploring an unknown region of the Dream Realm. Would Broken Sword have been so reckless and stubborn, knowing that he had a daughter who needed his care and protection? The legendary swordsman didn't strike Sonny as someone who would allow himself to die easily, unless some other forces were involved. And finally, there were the other members of his cohort. Sonny whispered their names.
Broken Sword, Smile of Heaven, Asterion, Keysong, Anvil of the Valor clan.
Asterion, Keysong, Anvil of Valor. He had heard those words straight from Nephis' mouth.
Aster, Song, Vale.
Sonny spent several hours reading the book about the history of the Immortal Clan book, and now, finally, he was starting to feel sleepy. Not to the point of needing to use the stimulants provided to him by Master Jet, but enough to make it harder for him to concentrate. Rubbing his face, he mentally repeated the names of Broken Sword's companions, the brilliant warriors who had become the first saints of the human race: Asterion, Keysong, Anvil of the Valor Clan. Why were they Aster, Song, and Vale? The names of the members of the legendary cohort were too similar to the 3 words that Nephis had once told him to never say out loud, among a couple of others, to be merely a coincidence. Sonny knew that the 3 words held enough meaning to free Neph from the haze of the Soul Devourer's mind hex, at least partially. They were triggering enough to give them to Sonny as a failsafe. She had reacted to them very strongly, so much so that Sonny had actually been afraid for his life for a moment before Nephis came to her senses. She had also asked him a strange question. He repeated it mentally, careful not to say anything out loud. "Which domain do you belong to?" Sonny had no idea what a capital D domain was back then, and he didn't know now, but he was sure that there was a capital letter there. He also suspected that people who had been trying to kill Nephis for most of her life were connected to these mysterious domains, which meant that Castor had been too. Domains and sovereigns, who apparently willed the destruction of the Immortal Flame Clan, were tied together. They had to be. All of it had something to do with lineage memories and the attributes they bestowed, like the fire attribute that was described as the lineage of the sun god, or his bloodweave, which was apparently both incomplete and forbidden. Sonny massaged his temples and sighed. For a long time, he had no clue about what Aster, Song, and Vale meant, but after seeing Shan, an adopted daughter of the great clan Song, he began to suspect that they were the names of the 3 legacy clans responsible for the numerous attempts on Neph's life, and maybe even the deaths of her parents and the downfall of the Immortal Flame Clan. Not only because of his inherent dislike of legacies, but also because of how peculiarly Changing Star had described her relationship with the Handmaiden. Trusted. Not really. Never, actually. Why would Nephis say that she would never ever trust Shan? Maybe it was because Shan belonged to one of the clans responsible for undoing her family. That was a logical assumption. But now, Sonny saw that maybe he was wrong. Maybe Aster, Song, and Vale weren't the names of clans. Maybe these were the nicknames belonging to 3 people. Asterion, Keysong, and Anvil of Clan Valor. They were Broken Sword's companions, and as such, Nephis had to have met them a lot before her father died. Neither Broken Sword himself nor his daughter would have been addressing them by their full names, right? What would she call them? Uncle Aster? Auntie Song? Sonny looked down, a dark expression appearing on his face. If these were the people who had later sent numerous assassins to hunt down the little girl who trusted them, then the hatred Nephis had for them would be easy to explain. It would also be easy to explain how a saint of Broken Sword's talent might have died. Maybe he had been stabbed in the back by the people he trusted the most. Even though there was no proof, it all made too much sense. Sonny felt that he was on the right track. But how were Asterion, Keysong, and Anvil of the Valor connected to the mysterious sovereigns? Did they serve them, or... His eyes widened, a terrible suspicion entering his mind. Not a suspicion, a certainty. It's them. They are the sovereigns. The revelation hit him like a hurricane squall, too vast to comprehend all at once. The key to it was a simple sentence that Nephis had once told him while overwhelmed by intense emotions. How did he miss it? Back when they had their falling out in a deserted alley of the outer settlement, Neff said, "You think Gunlog can stop me? You think a fallen terror can stop me? Those 3 ghouls can stop me? No, Sonny. Nothing will stop me. Anyone who dares will die. I'll kill them all." She had listed her enemies. She listed them in the order of magnitude. First, Gunlog, then the Crimson Terror, and then the Sovereigns. 3 ghouls, Aster, Song, and Vale. Just as he was trying to cope with that idea, another frightening realization appeared in Sonny's mind. He shuddered. Recalling another thing that Nephis had said, he then mumbled quietly, "No, I won't be the first one to conquer the 4th nightmare. I will be the first one to conquer every nightmare." Back then, he had understood her as wishing to be the first one to beat the 4th nightmare, as well as all the rest, but her words could have been interpreted differently. Among the awakened, there was a general agreement that the names of the ranks were not coincidental. Many people thought that the words used by the spell described the ascent toward godhood, or the descent into profanity as far as nightmare creatures were concerned. In many ways, these 2 paths were reflections of each other. A person of a 3rd rank was described as ascended, since they were rising above their human nature. A creature of the same rank was called fallen. This step had to do with ascension, or the opposite of it. A person of the 4th rank was described as transcendent, since they had transcended the mundane and assumed some qualities of the divine. A creature of the same rank was called corrupted. This step had to do with transformation. It was no coincidence that the aspect ability the saints received was called a transformation ability. The next step also had a special meaning to it. It represented authority and reign, be it supreme or great. Beings of that level were meant to consolidate their power and exert it upon the world. The 5th step of the class hierarchy was much the same, allowing nightmare creatures to create and control armies of lesser minions. Such creatures were called tyrants. What would a human who had reached the supreme rank be called then? Sonny trembled. A sovereign. Nephis had not meant that she would not only be the first human to conquer the 4th nightmare, but also all the rest. She had meant that she would be first to conquer the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th, because the 4th nightmare had already been conquered. Gods. Key of the Great Clan Song, Anvil of the Great Clan Valor, and a person called Asterion had conquered it. And Broken Sword of the Immortal Flame. Broken Sword had been mysteriously killed in the process. Aster, Song, and Vale had returned from the 4th nightmare, wreathed in new authority, while Broken Sword perished. What was a domain? Possibly the expression of the 5th aspect ability they had received. A special one, just like the special transformation ability the saints possessed. And, for some reason, they had chosen to keep their accomplishment a secret, instead exerting their influence on humanity from the shadows. Wasn't it strange that their names seemed to practically disappear from the pages of history after Broken Sword died? They, too, were the first to become saints after all. Not if they had chosen to keep them hidden. Wasn't it strange that Castor of Han Li clan seemed so loyal to the mysterious sovereigns who had ordered him to kill the last daughter of the Immortal Flame clan? Not if they were the real power behind the great legacy clans, to which his own lesser clan was beholden. Wasn't it hard to believe that there were words that could kill just by becoming known to a person? Not if those words were the names of the 3 supreme rulers who preferred to remain nameless. Sonny moaned slightly, then covered his face with his hands.
Shit. Why did I have to go and get myself involved in all this mess?
He had a feeling that his life had just become much more complicated. Sonny stared at the pile of books in front of him with a dark expression. After a while, he sighed heavily. So, hidden forces exerted influence over the entire human race. The authority was as invisible as it was frightening. And now, he knew their names. The sovereigns were at least as powerful as the government, or maybe even more so. The exact relationship between these two hegemonic powers, one official, the other secretive, was not clear, but for now, knowing the full extent of the authority resting in the hands of the sovereigns was not that important. However, knowing that the world was not as he had imagined was essential. It was much more dangerous. Why? Because if there was one thing that all wielders of authority shared, it was the hatred toward others encroaching on their power. That was just human nature. Among the strong, only one entity could be the strongest, and so, that entity was always apprehensive of others growing stronger. The bosses of criminal gangs in the outskirts were always paranoid of their lieutenants usurping them and tended to violently eliminate those who were too successful. In the Dark City, Gunlog reigned with an iron fist, destroying anyone who dared to be strong without submitting to his rule. And sovereigns would be much the same. Sonny was already powerful beyond reason, for a person of his age at least, and had even more frightening potential. The sovereigns would never allow him to exist outside their control. Luckily, they did not know the true extent of his strength yet. But since his main goal was to become stronger, as strong as he possibly could, as fast as he possibly could, to not fall behind Nephis, that was going to be a problem. Suddenly, some things about the awakened society became clearer. A long time ago, Sonny had learned that Master Jet had no chance of ever becoming a saint. Apparently, one had to have a team of outstanding companions and a lot of support to attempt to conquer the third nightmare, and she lacked both due to her problematic personality. Would sovereigns allow someone outside their grasp to become a saint? Most of the resources and knowledge about the Dream Realm belonged to the Legacy clans, especially regarding anything related to higher ranks, and the sovereigns controlled the clans, which basically meant they could prevent anyone from becoming a saint simply by refusing their support. How many talented masters like Jet were being suppressed from growing more powerful because they didn't serve one of the Supremes? There were a couple of saints serving the government at least. Whom were they really loyal to?
I hate it so much.
Of course, Sonny knew that all of this was just his conjecture, and yet, one thing was sure. The choice presented to him by Master Jet was not as straightforward as he had thought. In truth, he wasn't deciding between the great clans, the lesser clans, the government, and independence. He was deciding between entering into the service to the sovereigns or refusing it. And that choice was strained even further by his connection to Changing Star.
Damnation!
With a sigh, Sonny stared at the bookshelves surrounding him and then stood up. He had to get a few more books to read. Many hours later, he tiredly put the last one away and rubbed his face. Now that he had absorbed a lot of knowledge about the current geography and situation of the Dream Realm, a seed of a plan began to form in his mind. However, he still needed more information. He wouldn't be able to find it here, however. For that, he would have to visit an old acquaintance. One thing he did find, nevertheless, was a bit more information about the sovereigns. Asterion, Keysong, an Anvil of Valor, the last one was possibly the most renowned, an heir of the great clan. He was mentioned many times in the text describing the human expansion into the northern territories of the Dream Realm and the history of Bastion, one of the 3 central human citadels in the Dream Realm. In fact, he had apparently been responsible for slaying the Titan, whose remains were then used to create the chair Sunny was currently sitting on.
Strong.
Later, though, the traces of Saint Anvil disappeared. There was no mention of his death, but the reins of Clan Valor were now in the hands of his cousins, at least officially. Keysong was only slightly less famous. Unlike Anvil of Vale, he had come from one of the lesser legacy clans, and it was by her hand that it was elevated to the status of a great one. The stronghold of Clan Song, Ravenheart, was the second major human settlement in the Dream Realm. Its sphere of influence was separated from the other 2 territories by especially dreadful regions. The border with the Valor clan was especially deadly, but also rather thin. From what Sunny learned, Keysong was still the ruler of her clan, although she rarely appeared in public. She was known as a benevolent and charitable person, but that was pretty much all the information he could find. It seemed that her adoptive daughters mostly acted on her behalf. Shansong was one of them, although she was trapped on the Forgotten Shore for too long to be mentioned anywhere. And lastly, a man named Asterion was the most mysterious of the 3. No one seemed to know where he came from and where he went after the Broken Swords cohort was disbanded. In fact, there was barely any mention of him at all. Asterion was not connected to the 3rd Great Legacy clan, at least from the looks of it. Or any lesser clan for that matter. Sunny couldn't even find out when and where he had been born, let alone if he was still alive. Even in the text describing Broken Sword and his companion's deeds, the name Asterion is mentioned only in passing, as though he had never made any important contributions. Sunny shook his head and scowled.
Let me guess, he's the most terrifying of the 3.
That was an easy conclusion to make, because it took one to know one. Sunny himself was barely mentioned and tended to hide his contributions.
My head hurts.
The worst part was that this was only half of all the research he had to do. He had learned enough about the human position in the Dream Realm and the Sovereigns. Now, he had to learn as much as he could about the gods, the demons, and the unknown. It was time to pay teacher Julius a visit. Of course, Sunny couldn't visit his old instructor with empty hands. Pushing the books aside, he activated the terminal embedded into the table, lingered for a few moments, and then typed,
"All of the Forgotten Shore is separated into 3 parts, one of which..."
It took Sunny the rest of the night to compile all the information he had gathered about the Forgotten Shore into a concise, comprehensive report. Knowing how passionate Teacher Julius was about researching the Dream Realm, Sunny tried not to miss any important detail. He had described the region's geography and environment to the best of his ability, including all the notable landmarks he visited or heard about, as well as the peculiar name of the Dark Sea and the Labyrinth. He also described most of the nightmare creatures he had seen, met, or fought, writing down everything he knew about their powers, behavior, and weaknesses, using his own experience where possible. When possible, he included the information received directly from the spell, complete with the descriptions of memories and echoes he knew about. Of course, he provided those texts both in the human tongue and the runic language. Lastly, he had written down the results of his exploration and studies into the history of the Forgotten Shore.
describing in detail every engraving, every mosaic, and every mural he had seen. He also added his theories about what had happened to the ancient civilization and his observations on how the ancient people of the Forgotten Shore had lived before the fall. Of course, there were things that he had to keep to himself. Sonny omitted anything related to the nest of the vile thieving bird, the weaver, and the underground chamber beneath the ruined cathedral. He did not mention the Stone Saint, firstly because he wanted to keep her existence a secret, and secondly because she was connected to the unknown. He also avoided mentioning his battle against the coral golems, the banishment of the Cursed Sea, the eventual fate of the Crimson Terror, and the destruction of both the artificial sun and the spire itself. As far as everyone was concerned, Sonny had left through the gateway with the rest of the dreamers. No one had paid attention to his whereabouts in those last minutes, and he wanted to keep it that way. Well, no one except for Effie and Cassia, but he was reasonably sure that they would be discreet about certain things. And even if they failed to keep their lips sealed, Sonny had ways to explain his actions without revealing the truth. Finishing the report, Sonny leaned tiredly on the back of his chair and glanced at the screen. There, a long title was shown: Exploration Report on the Forgotten Shore by Awakened Sunless.
I think that's good enough.
Sonny had no idea how to write an academic paper, or a proper field report for that matter, so he had written and structured this document in a way that would have been the most helpful for his younger self a year ago when he had entered the Forgotten Shore without knowing anything about it. A manual such as this would have made so many things more manageable. Sonny sent the report to his communicator with a sigh, then turned off the terminal and stood up. Stretching his tired body, he swayed a little and yawned. It had already been 2 days since his return to the real world, so the fatigue was slowly accumulating. Soon, he would have to start using the stimulants provided to him by Master Jet, but that moment had not come yet. Sonny walked away from the table, hesitated a little, and returned. He picked up several books from the orderly pile and returned them to the proper shelves. After every book returned to its intended place, he nodded with satisfaction and finally left the library.
What a fascinating place. I like it there.
Looking back at the unassuming building, Sonny breathed in the cold winter air and remembered the description of Weaver's mask.
Weaver believed that knowledge was the origin of power, and so always hid behind numerous lies.
What would the Demon of Fate think about this place? It was, after all, a palace of knowledge. Sonny remembered the decorative pages that presented a washed, polished version of history and smiled.
Yeah, but it is also a palace of lies.
It was weird returning to the sleeper compound. The low, fortified building was much like he remembered, only weighed down by more snow. Sonny had not spent much time here, but those days before the winter solstice were some of the most memorable of his life. So much excitement, so much dread. Who knew he would not see it again for over a year? Entering the familiar hall, he looked around, half expecting to see a crowd of nervous sleepers. But, of course, there was no one around. Everyone had already left for their first venture into the dream realm, and it was too early for the following year's dreamers to arrive. Walking through the empty halls, he found his way to the lower levels of the compound and approached the Wilderness Survival classroom, which also served as Teacher Julius's office. Opening the door, he saw the spacious and tastefully decorated room where he had spent most of his short stay at the academy. Suddenly, Sonny was overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia.
Are you crazy? You're too young to be nostalgic about the good old days.
Sitting behind the wide wooden desk, his mentor was not at his usual place. Instead, the old man was standing in front of a glass case, studying the skull of a ferocious creature stored inside and taking notes. He hadn't changed at all. Teacher Julius was still old, with messy gray hair, absent-minded eyes, and a pair of bushy eyebrows that seemed to have a life of their own. His posture and expression were full of quiet melancholy. However, as soon as he heard someone entering the classroom, his face changed, becoming lively and curious once again. Turning around, the old man stared at the visitor with confusion. Then, his face suddenly lit up with a bright, infectious smile.
Sonny, my boy.
Teacher Julius was just the same, but Sonny's perception of him had changed. Not only because of how instrumental the things he had learned from the old instructor turned out to be for his survival, but also because of the history books he had just read.
How old is Teacher Julius anyway?
Sonny had never thought about it, but after learning more about Immortal Flame and the first generation of the Awakened, he couldn't help but see his mentor in a new light. Teacher Julius must have been, if not the same age as those legendary figures, then at least of the same generation. Those people had lived through much darker, much more violent times. They had survived the end of the world and built a new one from the ruins.
Sonny, my boy.
Before Sonny could react properly, he was subjected to a passionate hug. Then Teacher Julius unceremoniously pushed him to the nearest chair.
Finally, you're back. I never doubted that you would return, not even for a moment. No student of mine would allow himself to die easily.
Sonny couldn't help but smile while listening to the excitement in the old man's voice. Before coming here, he was slightly worried that Teacher Julius would not even remember him. Despite the fact that his course was not the most popular at the academy, the eccentric instructor must have mentored thousands of sleepers throughout his career. What was one more? But luckily, Sonny had been wrong.
But my boy, a whole year. Did you like it in the Dream Realm so much that you didn't want to return? Did you not think that your old teacher would be worried sick? In the name of the gods, what happened?
Sonny hesitated a little, then said apologetically,
Well, Teacher Julius, I ended up in an unexplored region of the Dream Realm, and the only gateway there was guarded by a fallen terror.
The old man blinked.
Heavens, how horrible. So, what did you do?
Sonny shrugged.
Well, the shortish version. I met two beautiful girls, escorted them to an ancient castle, spent a few months exploring a cursed city, went on a long and arduous quest to find a magic crown, killed a devil, helped a princess become a queen, participated in a war or two, climbed an evil tower, and finally ended up near the gateway.
Sonny let out a nervous laugh.
Basically, I survived. Just how you taught me to.
Teacher Julius listened to him very carefully, then nodded a few times. Then he smiled broadly.
Great, you did great. Just as expected from one of my students. But, Sonny...
The old man's eyes suddenly shone brightly, full of excitement.
Did you say something about an unexplored region?
Sonny smiled, then activated his communicator.
I did. I've compiled a lengthy report about things I have seen, fought, and discovered there. Would you like to take a look? I can send it to you.
Teacher Julius looked down with embarrassment.
A report? Oh, you shouldn't have. You must be so terribly busy right now.
However, even while he spoke, the old man was already opening the file. As soon as he started reading, his eyes widened and a delighted smile appeared on his face.
Brilliant! This is brilliant. Wait, what's that? You even remembered to include citations in the original runic?
That's my boy. Marvelous. Ha! Well-preserved ruins. A whole city. Is there a... There is? Oh, my!
It took Teacher Julius some time to skim through the report. Throughout the whole process, he continued to mumble under his nose in an increasingly excited tone. Some remarks Sonny understood, while some went completely over his head. Like,
Greystone architecture. Possible connections to the third wandering Archon.
or,
Which era of the Babel script would that correspond to?
or,
Rats! That'll show that smug bastard Sando how wrong his universal origin of rituals ramblings were.
The old man's eyes gradually grew wider and wider. Finally, he deactivated his communicator and looked at Sonny with an expression of profound exhilaration.
You've done exceptionally well, Sonny. Of course, your report is rough around the edges and needs a lot of work to be published. But this is going to make so many people happy. I can name at least a dozen theories that can be expanded, confirmed, or refuted thanks to all the new data you provided. And that's just off the top of my head. Not to mention all the good that will come from the detailed descriptions of so many new types of nightmare creatures you included.
Teacher Julius smiled proudly.
You truly have a heart of an explorer, my boy. Very few people do, and out of those, even fewer have a keen mind such as yours. Not to mention the ability to venture into the deadly expanse of the dream realm and not only come back alive, but also remember to look at more than just what's in front of them. But it is thanks to such people that we can deepen our knowledge of the spell.
He sighed.
Most of the Awakened only know how to hack and slash. They tend to look at us with very little respect, but it is only because of us that they know how to hack and where to slash. Luckily, there are few bright minds here and there.
Sonny stared at his mentor with a bit of surprise. He had not expected such an intense reaction. He just wrote down his findings about the Forgotten Shore to please the old man, considering they shared a hobby.
I'm sorry. Published? What do you mean by that exactly?
Teacher Julius glanced at him with a humorous spark in his eyes.
Oh, don't worry. This old man is not going to rob his own student of the reward. I'll help you get this paper to a proper state free of charge. I don't even need to be put down as a co-author, although it would make me happy if you did. But what do I need money for? I have more money than I could ever spend already.
Sonny tilted his head, then blinked a couple of times. His heart was suddenly grasped by burning emotions.
Excuse me, Teacher Julius, but did you say something about money?
The old man stared at him with confusion.
Yes, I did. Isn't it why you've compiled this marvelous report? To receive the contribution points from the government?
Sonny lingered for a bit, then slowly shook his head.
No, I just thought you would like to read it. I don't even know what those contribution points you mentioned are.
Teacher Julius looked at him for a while, then burst out laughing.
Oh my, what a good student I have. You really delighted me today, Sonny. Such pure dedication to the noble calling of an explorer. I wish more people were as selfless as you.
Sonny bit back a laugh. His eyes still flared wide at that notion.
Selfless?
He thought.
What do you mean selfless? There's not a single selfless bone in my body. Is there really money to be made from my stupid report?
The old man shook his head and started to explain.
The government rewards those who enrich the base of knowledge we have about the spell, the dream realm, and the nightmare creatures quite generously. The more rare and vital the information you submit is, the more contribution points you receive. These points can be exchanged for a variety of useful things, or simply turned into credits. Considering that no one has ever explored the Forgotten Shore before, and how comprehensive your report is, I'd say you'll receive a pretty sizable sum. You really didn't know about this?
Sonny slowly shook his head.
How sizable are we talking? Like, if I want to rent an apartment or a house? If I want to rent a house in an area of the city with clean air, how many weeks would this reward buy?
Teacher Julius gave him a strange look.
Rent a house? What a strange example. Sonny, with how unique the data you contributed is, you don't need to rent a house. Wouldn't it be easier to just buy one?
Sonny gaped. He had never even considered, had never even dreamed. He stood there silently. Teacher Julius leaned in.
Sonny, are you all right?
Sonny couldn't respond. He was in the process of falling out of his chair. After a moment of shock, Sonny regained enough composure to continue the conversation. It took quite a bit of effort, pushing aside the thoughts of a comfortable, cushy lifestyle. No, he had to get back to business. Sonny and Teacher Julius chatted for a while, discussing the exact process of publishing the report, what changes would have to be made, and how they would work together to bring the project to fruition. All of it, of course, was going to have to happen only after Sonny had settled in the Dream Realm and found a citadel to anchor himself to. He did not exactly have time to work on an academic paper quite yet. Teacher Julius also shared some of his knowledge about the human settlements in the Dream Realm and his views on how to decide on a proper citadel. All his advice, however, could be described in one sentence.
Find one with good plumbing.
Sonny wasn't sure what to make of it, but judging by the pained expression on the old man's face, it was indeed an important factor. Finally, he managed to turn the conversation toward the original goal of the visit.
Speaking of that, I am really unclear on one thing. While exploring the Dark City, I found a few places of worship. However, the deities they worshipped seemed to be different from the ones I heard about in my first nightmare. Did the native humans of the Dream Realm have different gods?
Teacher Julius looked at him and smiled.
Ah, the gods. That is an interesting subject indeed.
He paused for a few moments, lost in thought.
Yes and no. The gods worshipped in different regions had different names, but from what we can tell, those names all describe the same entities. The current consensus is that the gods of the Dream Realm were in fact actual beings, perhaps creatures of the divine rank.
Sonny nodded.
Really? Then, where are they now?
The old man sighed.
That is the strange thing about the gods. They are dead, just like everything else in the Dream Realm is dead. They seem to have been alive in the periods of many of the nightmares, but the ruins we have encountered and explored mostly describe them as having been destroyed. By what or whom, though, we do not know. We also don't know if they existed before or after the nightmare spell itself appeared.
He lingered for a bit, then added,
But we do know a few things about the gods. For example, how many of them there were.
Sonny smiled.
Let me guess. 7?
Teacher Julius chuckled.
You would think that, right? But no, there were only 6 gods. Their most common names were Sun, War, Beast, Storm, Heart, and Shadow. Although those names don't do them justice, truth be told.
Sonny raised an eyebrow.
Really? How so?
His mentor rubbed his chin, then said doubtfully,
Well, a god is too vast of a being to be described with one word. Take the goddess of war. Oh, yes, their gender seems to be very mercurial. The war god is supposed to be the deity of warfare, and in a sense, he or she is. But he is also the god of life.
What? How does that make any sense?
The old man smiled.
War is synonymous with struggle, and what is life if not a constant struggle for survival? So the goddess of war can also be called the goddess of life. She is also the goddess of progress, technology, craft, intellect, and through all of this, the patron goddess of humanity.
There was a spark in Teacher Julius's eye. This was clearly a favored subject of his. He was deeply engrossed in the discussion of the topic, enough to quickly veer off into small tangents.
Or take the beast god. He is also often described as the goddess of the moon, as well as hunting, carnal desire, blood, beauty, and the cycle of birth and death. The sun god is also the lord of light, a manifestation of fire, passion, creation, and destruction. The storm god is also the god of the depths, of the oceans, of darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster, and so on.
Sonny cleared his throat.
What about Shadow God?
The eccentric instructor shrugged.
I'm not too familiar with that one. As far as gods go, Shadow is not very prominent. Well, as a shadow should be, I guess. He is sometimes called the god of peace, death, solace, and mysteries. But that's all I can recall about him.
Sonny hesitated for a few moments. He was choosing his words carefully. It wasn't that he did not trust Teacher Julius, but still, he had to be careful.
I see. Hard to imagine that only 6 entities were responsible for all that. Were there, perhaps, any other divine beings?
Teacher Julius thought for a few moments, then shook his head.
There were certainly many beings that were either partially divine or even almost as powerful as the gods themselves. We don't know much about them, though. Take daemons, for example.
Sonny held his breath. Perhaps this would be useful. Teacher Julius continued.
Daemons were such mysterious creatures. They were described as having power almost equal to that of the gods, but of a different nature. They also seem to have created themselves, or at least appeared out of nowhere. Almost nothing is known about them, except for the fact that there were 7 of them, one more terrible than the other.
Sonny raised an eyebrow.
Terrible? Why were they terrible?
The old man smiled.
What can be more terrifying than a creature that came out of nowhere wielding enough power to wage war against the heavens? Don't forget that what humans fear the most is the unknown. Perhaps the gods were much the same.
Sonny hesitated for a long time. He had so many other questions to ask, but had to choose his words wisely. He couldn't risk saying the wrong thing or saying a word that could get him killed. Finally, he asked,
Teacher Julius, have you ever heard about the unknown?
His mentor gave him a curious look, then laughed.
What kind of a question is that? Haven't I dedicated my whole life to exploring the unknown? I think the lack of sleep is getting to you, my boy. Come, I have wasted enough of your time. A newly awakened like you should be running around trying to find patronage or ingratiate themselves to a welcoming clan. I'll recommend you several books on gods and divinity to read once you have settled out there in the dream realm.
Sonny smiled weakly, realizing that Teacher Julius did not know anything about the Weaver, the reasons why the gods were dead, or the unknown. Strangely, he felt relieved. Leaving the sleeper compound, Sonny felt as though even the winter cold could not keep him from feeling sleepy anymore. Wondering what time it was, he looked up out of habit and glanced at the sun. The sun was all wrong. Suddenly, Sonny was wide awake, his hand instinctively outstretched to summon the Midnight Shard. It took him a few moments to recognize his error. Oh, the sun is normal. It's just not the same as on the Forgotten Shore. He also didn't have to measure time by observing the sky anymore. He had a communicator that could show him what time of day it was, up to the exact nanosecond. Shaking his head, Sonny headed back toward the hospital complex. He was late for a memorial of sorts. The survivors of the Dreamer Army were supposed to gather today to celebrate those who remained alive and remember those who had fallen, those who would never return. Entering the medical center, he started to head toward the conference hall, but then lingered for a moment in front of a monitor attached to the wall. There, 100 names were shown, listing everyone who had made it back. And on the very top of it, there were 3 very special ones. Raised by Wolves, Nightingale, Song of the Fallen, Effie, Kai, and Cassia. Sonny stared at the 3 true names for some time, then slowly lowered his gaze. Right beneath was his name. With a grim expression on his face, Sonny opened the doors and entered the hall. The former sleepers of the Forgotten Shore were all there. At least those who had awoken at the academy or could make it there for the memorial. He looked around the crowd, searching for familiar faces. It was strange to see all these people back in the real world, especially without Nephis. Now that they were out of danger and had lost their leader, there wasn't a lot to keep them together. If anything, there were now more forces and factors trying to split them apart. Before, they were united by necessity and the irresistible will of Changing Star. Now, nothing remained to prevent the old grievances from pulling them apart. And yet, the 100 survivors seemed strangely united. Perhaps it was the shared trauma of their harrowing experience in the dream realm, or something else that Sonny couldn't quite understand. But there was no division between them. On the contrary, every awakened gathered in the hall seemed to share an invisible bond with all the others. Sonny looked across the room and thought, "Weird." Many people welcomed his arrival with warm greetings. Sonny smiled awkwardly and did his best to reciprocate their goodwill. After a few such encounters, he finally noticed Kai at the back of the crowd. Sonny stumbled and stared at his friend for a couple of seconds. Well, I'll be damned. How could that guy become even more gorgeous? The awakening made Kai's slender figure even more graceful, his perfect face even more handsome, and his electric green eyes even more mesmerizing. His luscious dark auburn hair was now neatly cut and styled. His clothes were simple and exquisitely fashionable, and the several pieces of jewelry he wore somehow managed to enhance every one of those features by bringing it just the right amount of attention. Damn, such injustice. Shouldn't even be allowed. With a resentful sigh, Sonny made his way through the crowd and approached his friend. Kai noticed him from afar, and then the conference hall suddenly seemed to become much brighter due to his brilliant smile. "Sonny, you're finally here." Sonny wanted to answer, but then froze for a second. noticing a stranger next to the charming young man. A sickly, terribly gaunt young woman was sitting in a wheelchair, staring at them with a tired expression. There was clearly something off about her body. She was unhealthily thin, with pale skin stretching over brittle bones and a strange twist to her spine. Her legs seemed lifeless and weak, tucked awkwardly on the step of her wheelchair. Her neck was clearly struggling to support the weight of her head. It was only when the young woman smiled mischievously that he finally recognized her.
What's the matter, doofus? You've been struck dumb by my beauty?
With a giggle, Effie spun her wheelchair, as though giving him the chance to take a good look.
Effie? That's Effie? How?
Sonny stared at her for a couple of moments, trying to connect the image of the mighty huntress he knew, tall, strong, beautiful, and full of vigor, to this weak, gaunt young woman. He only spoke when the pain of the flaw pierced his mind, keeping him from holding back his questions.
Not really. What the hell happened to you?
Effie smiled and shrugged.
Nothing. This is how I have always been in the real world.
Something moved in Sonny's memory. He remembered how the two of them sat on the support beam of the ruined cathedral, talking in whispers.
For some of us, the real world was more of a hell than the dream realm.
That was what Effie had said back then. Noticing the strange expression on his face, she grinned.
Don't worry about it. At least now that I'm awakened, I can move my hands. Look at this.
She grabbed the handles of the wheels, then balanced her chair at an angle and spun it around again.
See? Ain't that the coolest thing you've ever seen?
Sonny hesitated for a bit, then said quietly,
Yes, one of the coolest, by far.
Effie gave him a smile, then glanced at Kai.
See, Knight? Your celebrity aura's got nothing on my burning charisma.
The young man looked at her, but didn't say anything. Instead, he suddenly took a step forward and gave Sonny a big hug.
Sonny, thank God you're alive.
Sonny squirmed a little, but then surrendered to being embraced. With a resigned expression, he endured for as long as he could, and then said through gritted teeth,
Why shouldn't I be alive, fool? I wasn't the one whose unconscious lanky body had to be dragged all the way to the gateway.
Kai squeezed him even tighter, then finally released his hold on him. Taking a step back, the charming young man hesitated for a couple of seconds and sighed.
Still, with your luck, I'm surprised that the whole spire didn't just fall on your head.
Sonny froze, then forced out a smile.
Yeah, that would have been terrible, wouldn't it?
But Sonny knew his eyes betrayed him. He just hoped no one would notice. Soon, several instructors appeared. In a solemn and sonorous atmosphere, each of them gave a small speech, congratulating the survivors of the Dreamer Army on overcoming the immeasurable hardships and returning to the real world alive. They also spoke about those who had fallen and offered words of solace, saying that their sacrifice would not be forgotten by mankind. After all, mankind only continued to exist because of young men and women like them. To Sonny, these words rang hollow and empty, but they affected many people in the crowd. He saw a few people crying, the others trying to keep a brave face. Everyone had lost a friend, a companion, or a loved one during the tumultuous last days on the Forgotten Shore. Finally, Instructor Rock took the stage and spoke in length about the meaning of being awakened, their duty to safeguard humanity, and what they should do and expect in the next few days. However, at some point, he was interrupted.
Lady Nephis, tell us what happened to her.
A hum of voices rose above the crowd, everyone joining in that plea. Instructor Rock sighed. Calm down, Awakened. I'll tell you everything we know. The survivors of the Dreamer army grew silent, staring at him with piercing intensity. The mighty man hesitated for a few seconds. As all of you know by now, the gateway of the Forgotten Shore seemed to have been destroyed. Changing Star, who took it upon herself to distract the fallen terror to allow her people to escape, did not make it through in time. A heavy, tortured tension hung in the air. The young men and women gathered in the hall kept silent, but their faces betrayed the storm of painful emotions raging in their hearts. Instructor Rock continued, However, she is still alive out there, in the Dream Realm. Her vital signs and brain activity readings are all stable. It seems that Lady Nephis managed to escape the terror at least. He didn't need to say the rest. Everyone understood what it meant. She was trapped in the Dream Realm with no way to come back. Sunny glanced at the newly awakened around him, wondering what the reaction would be. Guilt? Sorrow? Fury? However, he was surprised by what he saw. A few moments later, a voice resounded from the crowd, full of adamant belief. She will return. If anything can do it, it's Lady Nephis. A wave of voices then joined that first one, all expressing their agreement.
That's right. She is Changing Star of the Immortal Flame. She won't die. Who says that she escaped from the terror? I bet Lady Nephis is currently roasting its meat, looking at a map and thinking where to find another gateway.
Exactly. Immortal Flame cannot be extinguished. There was no guilt, sorrow, or fury. Only hope. Only faith. Uncomfortable, Sunny turned to Effie and Kai. Both seemed to be a little bit sad, but strangely calm.
What do you guys think?
Effie hesitated for a few seconds, then shrugged.
I sort of agree. If anyone can make it out alive from there, it's Princess. It sounds impossible, but I mean, it's her. You know how she is.
Kai remained silent for a bit, then nodded. That's what I believe too. Or at least, try to believe. Saying those words, he looked around with concern and said, But Cassia must be devastated. Have you seen her? Sunny stared at him grimly, then turned away.
I did earlier. She is.
Strangely, today the blind girl was nowhere to be found. To his relief, Kai sighed, then rubbed his face. I really want to sleep. It's tough staying awake for that long. What about you guys? Sunny shrugged.
I'm fine for now. I also have a pack of military-grade stimulants to keep me awake for a few more days.
Effie glanced at them and grinned.
I am not sleepy at all. However, to be honest, I am dying from hunger. There has to be food here somewhere, right?
Sometime later, they were in the cafeteria of the hospital complex. Sunny and Kai were already done with their dinner and observed with dark fascination as Effie was finishing her fourth serving. There was a small mountain of empty plates in front of her. Finally, the huntress was done with the food and leaned back tiredly in her wheelchair, full of satisfaction.
That's life. Sunny, go bring me something to drink.
He stared at her with a dark expression and asked,
I already brought you the last 3 trays. Why don't you ask Kai?
Effie grinned.
Aren't you the youngest? Respect your elders, brat. Also, Kai and I are big shots now, way out of your league. Why would I ask a valiant, true name Awakened to serve me food when there's a nameless gremlin like you loitering around?
Sunny gritted his teeth, then obediently stood up and went to bring the young woman a few drinks. When he returned, Kai looked at him apologetically. Sorry about that, Sunny. Actually, I'm really surprised that you didn't receive a true name as well.
No one deserves it more than you, in my opinion, really.
Sunny shifted uncomfortably and said,
Yeah, well, you're not wrong. I do deserve a true name, don't I? What a travesty. Hey, Knight, what do you think Sunny's true name would be?
Kai blinked a couple of times.
I'm not sure. Something like famous last words?
He chuckled lightly and then added,
Or, no, really, that happened. What about you, Effie? What do you think?
Effie glanced at Sunny, then smiled with mischief.
Looks good in a dress?
He stared at her with murder in his eyes.
Hey!
While the gaunt young woman was laughing, Sunny turned to Kai and frowned.
Speaking of true names, Effie I can understand, but Nightingale? You were really named just like your band? What's up with that?
Then he looked at the charming Archer with suspicion and said in a grave tone,
Kai, tell me honestly, the spell is also one of your fangirls, right?
His friend choked on his drink, then wiped his face awkwardly and gave Sunny a reproachful look. Finally, he looked down and sighed.
If it is, then not in a good way.
Sunny smiled and leaned back on his chair, then looked at his friends with curiosity. There was a question he really wanted to ask, but tried not to up until now.
What's your second ability anyway?
His words hung in the air for a few moments. Suddenly, Kai coughed with embarrassment and looked away. After a couple of seconds, he said in a strange tone,
I, can see really far now, when I want to, even when there's no light. I am also supposed to be able to see through illusions and all forms of obfuscation, whatever that means. And, I can also see through objects.
Sunny and Effie stared at him and asked almost simultaneously,
Like through walls?
Like through clothes? Kai hid behind his glass, lingered for a bit, and then answered in a small voice.
Yes, but I would never.
While Sunny tried to imagine why would Kai refuse to look through walls, Effie laughed out loud.
I see. What a great ability.
She shook her head and then turned to Sunny and asked,
Hey, Doofus, I bet you often wanted to stab me with something sharp. Wanna try?
He frowned in confusion, then raised an eyebrow.
No. Why would I stab you?
Effie looked at him with expectation clearly written on her face, then sighed in disappointment when he didn't move.
That's a shame. I wanted to demonstrate my second ability to you. Basically, it makes my whole body invulnerable. Well, comparatively, of course. Skin of steel, that sort of deal. A very sweet, comprehensive defense boost, if I do say so myself.
Sunny blinked and looked at the gaunt young woman with a bit of awe. Indeed, that was a very powerful ability. Combined with Effie's previous one, it turned her into an exceedingly formidable presence on the battlefield, as if she had not been a real menace already. Effie glanced at him and asked curiously,
Well, what about you?
He shifted slightly.
Very neat type of conditional short-distance teleportation. Kai can see through walls, I can go through walls, while you can just plow through them, I guess, in your usual barbarous fashion.
Effie grinned.
Plowing, huh? Interesting choice of words. I wonder if...
Sunny hurriedly changed the subject.
So, what are your plans, guys? What citadels are you going to?
His sudden question changed the mood of the conversation. For a while, a strange silence settled among them. All three had contemplative, wistful expressions on their faces. This situation was inevitable, really, but they tried to avoid the discussion for as long as possible, mostly because it was both slightly awkward and slightly sad. Back on the Forgotten Shore, the three of them had forged a bond, and now, depending on their choices, that bond would most likely either weaken or break. The future was going to lead each on their own path, perhaps in opposite directions. For better or worse, they were about to go their separate ways. Perhaps fate would bring them together again, one day. Or perhaps not. After a while, Effie sighed.
I don't know, really. I've received invitations from both Clan Valor and Clan Song. But you know me, I don't do well with authority. Plus, none of them have moved a finger to help me when I really needed it. Only now that I am a hot commodity are they all suddenly kind and friendly. Rubs me the wrong way, to be honest.
She looked at her wheelchair, then slumped in it tiredly.
Anyway, I might try to take them up on the offer. Or I might not. It depends on what the fastest way to get ready for the second nightmare would be. Maybe I'll have a better chance of becoming a master soon if I stay independent and don't have to compete against the actual heirs for resources and attention.
After the second nightmare, one spiritual body became their physical body. Reaching the rank of a master would free Effie from her terrible disability. So Sunny understood her motivation perfectly. Now he knew why she had said that for her, striving to conquer the second nightmare was the only way. Funnily enough, through no wish of his own, Sunny had ended up in a similar situation. Kai remained silent for a few moments. Then he sighed.
As for me, my agency has secured me a very good position in Bastion, so I'll be going there soon. I won't have to fight another nightmare creature for a long, long time, I guess. Maybe even never.
For someone who was speaking about being safe and comfortable for the rest of his life, he didn't sound too happy. There was a note of reluctance in his voice, even shame. Sunny frowned.
You drop that tone immediately, Kai. There's nothing wrong with living like a person should. Not having to worry about being eaten every goddamn day. Don't even think about feeling bad about it. Got it?
The charming young man smiled sadly and nodded.
I do. Please, forgive my ungratefulness. But what about you, Sunny?
Sunny scratched the back of his head, then shrugged.
Well, I'm rich now. You won't believe it, guys. But as it turns out, scribbling a few words about the things you see in the dream realm can actually earn you money. And I think I can weasel my way into receiving a salary from the academy as a research assistant. Whatever that means. So, actually, I haven't decided on a particular citadel yet. But I can pick pretty much any of them, since the government is being very friendly.
Both Effie and Kai stared at him with incredulous expressions, clearly trying to imagine Sunny as an academic, or even an instructor. Then, both shook their heads simultaneously.
Can't imagine.
Yeah, sounds wrong.
About the citadels, though.
So, which one are you going to choose?
He thought for a bit, then shrugged.
Don't know yet, but I can tell you a secret. Something that very few people know or think about. A very wise man told me to base my choice on it.
Sunny lingered for a moment, then said seriously,
Plumbing. The secret to a happy life is to find a citadel with great plumbing.
Soon, it was time to say goodbye. Their parting was both warm and bittersweet. After seeing Kai and Effie off, Sunny lingered outside for a bit, and then returned to his room on one of the underground levels of the hospital complex. It was already evening, and his eyes were full of sand. With an irritated snarl, Sunny took one of the stimulant patches out of the pack and plastered it on his skin. Immediately, a cold fire flowed through his veins. His heart accelerated, and his mind cleared. Sunny felt refreshed, energized, and ready to chew on mountains. Of course, there was a price to pay for such a boost. It would be inevitably followed by a debilitating crash of the same magnitude, unless he used another stimulant, that is, and then another and another. Only with each new one, the duration of the effect would shorten, and the strain on his body would increase. If he was a mundane human, his heart would have probably exploded just from one of these unassuming patches. The government didn't joke around with its military tech, but he wasn't ready to make a decision just yet. He had to do a few more things, like finally checking on his new memory.
Summoning the runes, he glanced at a particular cluster. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Ordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Blood Blossom, Dark Wing, Moonlight Shard. Sunny paused for a moment on the broken runes. Old. He knew what that memory was, but he would deal with that later. He continued reading. Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath. The last one, Broken Oath, came from the twisted simulacrum of one of the 7 ancient heroes of the Forgotten Shore, the Lord. Even though the coral golem had turned out to be just an awakened monster, Sunny had high hopes for this memory. But before he concentrated on it, Sunny stared at the rest of his arsenal. 1, 2, 3, 12. After a year of constant battles and bloodshed, he only had 12 memories. Of course, he would have had much more if not for the need to feed Saint. The taciturn creature demanded a vast amount of resources to get her to the 200 shadow fragments, which was one of his goals. If not for that, he would have made a real windfall. Sunny already considered himself wealthy thanks to the contribution points Teacher Julius was going to arrange for him. But if he had a dozen or 2 extra memories to sell, well, he would have been not just wealthy, but extravagantly so. Enough to buy several houses if he wished to. Maybe he still could sell some. Looking at his trusty weapons and tools, Sunny hesitated. Now that he could use Shadow Step to blink from one place to another, he didn't need to enhance his mobility that much. So, Prowling Thorn and Darkwing were potential candidates to be auctioned off. Maybe. They still had their uses, though. The rest he couldn't even imagine selling, at least not before finding better alternatives. Even the Silver Bell, it was useful in a few vital moments, but wasn't as obviously useful as others. But it had something of a sentimental value. The little bell was the first memory he had ever received, and its description was sort of... It touched something in his heart.
Shit.
Sunny muttered.
I just used the stimulant. Why is my mind so scattered?
With a frown, Sunny finally concentrated on his new memory. Memory, Broken Oath, Memory Rank, Awakened, Memory Tier, 1, Memory Type, Charm. His eyes widened slightly. Jackpot. Another charm. Excited, Sunny read further. Memory Description. They made a terrible oath to destroy the curse, or be consumed by it. Those who have broken the oath were consumed by the curse, and those consumed by the curse have broken their oath. In the end, none could escape their promise.
Huh. That's morbid. I guess that's how the Carapace Legion was born.
He looked at the next string of runes. Memory Enchantments, Oathbreaker. Enchantment Description. The broken oath erodes the souls of all those who approach it. Sunny held his breath for a few moments.
A soul attack.
Both the nightmare creatures and the awakened had many ways to destroy their enemies. Kinetic damage or a physical attack was the most common, but there were many others. Among them, soul damage was the rarest and hardest to defend against. It was no coincidence that Soul Reaper Jet, whose aspect allowed her to strike directly at the soul, was so feared. And now, Sunny had a soul attack of his own in the arsenal. There was one problem, however.
Wait, erodes souls of all who come near? Will it affect me then as well?
A deep frown appeared on his face. Sunny hesitated for a while. He was wary of what would happen, but he had to check. Better now than in the middle of a battle. He stole himself, then sighed and summoned the memory into existence. Soon, a glistening gem made out of polished crimson coral appeared on his hand. A second later, he suddenly shuddered and groaned. As soon as the broken oath appeared, a sickening sensation permeated his entire being. It was as though someone was slowly draining the very life out of him. Not only that, but he also felt weaker. Looking down, Sunny saw his shadows ripple and react. The surly one stared at him with outrage and waved its hands in the air angrily, while the friendly one was hugging itself pitifully and pacing.
Oh no!
He had recognized the debilitating feeling that the gem produced. It was the same aura that had weakened him when he fought the coral golem. It was also, thankfully, the infinitely weaker version of the annihilating soul attack of the artificial sun. Gritting his teeth, Sunny dismissed the broken oath. Only when it disappeared completely could he breathe freely again.
Oh, shit.
That was one serious side effect. How was he supposed to use his new charm if it would be slowly killing not only his enemies, but also Sunny himself? Drop it on the ground and use Shadow Step to blink away and hope for the best? Sunny sat quietly for a while, thinking. Then, a tentative smile appeared on his face.
Wait, that should work, right?
Turning away from the runes describing the soul-destroying gem, he concentrated on the description of his loyal shadow demon. Shadow, Marble Saint. Shadow rank, Awakened. Shadow class, Demon. Shadow attributes, Battlemaster, Stalwart, Spark of Divinity. Shadow abilities, Weapon Sage, Underworld Armament. Shadow fragments, 80 out of 200. Concentrating on the Underworld Armament ability, Sunny read, Stone Saint's armor can accommodate a charm memory to inherit its enchantments. His smile widened.
Good. That's the first part.
Looking a bit higher, he found another string of runes. Attribute, Stalwart. Attribute description. The Stone Saint is highly resistant to all forms of damage, as well as being fully immune to mind and soul attacks. Fully immune to mind and soul attacks.
Yes!
Sunny let out a satisfied sigh. The broken oath was pretty useless by itself, but when combined with Saint's special ability and attributes, it would make his shadow even more lethal. That was because Saint was a very special kind of demon, one whose will couldn't be intruded upon or shaken, both her mind and her soul. Well, the shadow that inhabited her body instead of a soul, were utterly indomitable. He only had to make sure not to be anywhere near the living statue while she had the crimson gem set into her armor. Tricky, but doable. And speaking of armor, he was not done exploring his memories yet. He had left the best for last. Looking at the shimmering runes, Sunny concentrated on a particular string, one that looked broken and incomplete. Memory, old. The memory was broken runes, incomplete. But not for long. Now that he was awakened, he could finally restore the broken onyx armor he had bought from Stev for a measly handful of soul shards. The ascended suit of armor of the 6th tier, the most powerful memory he owned. Or seen, even. Summoning the broken onyx armor, Sunny strained his muscles, and, with some effort, managed to place it on the floor in front of him. Even now that he was awakened, The weight of the stone memory was not something he could endure easily without using both of his shadows or wasting essence to enhance his strength. Breathing a bit heavily, Sunny studied the damaged memory. The suit of ancient plate armor was jet black. Its design was intricate and solemn, radiating a feeling of dark resolve and stalwart adamantine grace. Its glossy surface seemed to absorb and devour any light that fell on it. All parts of the armor were perfectly fitted to one another, creating an almost seamless barrier of impenetrable steel. Well, not steel yet. Stone. The ancient armor looked extremely similar to the one Stone Saint had worn, and now that the Shadow was a demon, they were even more alike. The onyx armor in front of Sunny was still more impressive though, more regal, as if created for a being of a higher status. And just like the armor worn by the saint, it would only transform from actual stone into the miraculous stone-like alloy if risen from its passive state. It couldn't be done yet though, because its spell weave was damaged. To repair it, the self-restoring properties of the broken memory had to be activated by an infusion of essence, which no one back on the Forgotten Shore could do. But Sunny wasn't on the Forgotten Shore anymore, and he was no longer just a mere sleeper. Now, Sunny was an awakened. Not only could he control the flow of shadow essence inside his body, but he even had the Soul Serpent to help him guide it. Placing his hands on the cold surface of the onyx breastplate, Sunny closed his eyes and sent the essence into the onyx armor. The shadow essence flowed through the coils of the Soul Serpent into his left hand, then surged into the cold black onyx. There was no resistance that Sunny had to overcome to transfer it from his body into the stone armor. After all, the armor was his memory, and as such, could be considered to be a part of his soul. The surge of energy rushed through the ancient armament, then returned to his body through his right hand. Soon, a stable cycle was established, with a constant current of shadow essence circulating through both Sunny himself and the onyx armor. It was a strange feeling, as if there was an ethereal river flowing through him, moving endlessly in a circle. Thanks to the Shadow Guide attribute of the Soul Serpent, its current was especially swift and powerful. Soon, the onyx armor became saturated by shadow essence. As Sunny watched, it slowly began to change. This was the fundamental trait of both the Saint and her armaments, with which the memory shared a common origin. Both were made out of a strange living stone. When imbued with soul energy, the taciturn demon's body turned from stone to bizarre stone-like flesh, while her weapons turned to stone-like steel. Sunny knew this because he had seen the remains of both the original Stone Saint and her fellow stone warrior after they had been defeated by the monstrous iron spiders. After being destroyed, the living statues had turned back into inanimate stone. The memory was transforming right in front of his eyes. Soon, its glossy black surface felt different to the touch, colder, lighter, more resilient, closer to metal than stone. The living armament had assumed its true form. Sunny smiled. And now, the most important part. Sunny gazed through the dark metal and peered at the ethereal weave hiding beneath it. The pattern of the diamond string was much more complex and vast than any that he had ever seen, with the exception of the weaver's mask. But then, nothing could compare to that miraculous memory. There were 6 bright embers serving as anchors for the countless threads of light inside the onyx armor. However, the weave was damaged and chaotic. Thousands of strings were torn and disconnected from the rest of the pattern, breaking its flow and logic. Because of that, the armor couldn't repair itself before. It needed to be imbued with essence and turn from dead stone to enchanted metal for the self-repairing properties that all memories possess to come into effect. And now, it was. With an expression of wonder on his face, Sonny observed as the spell weave started to repair itself. The diamond string moved against the invisible winds that had been playing with them before. The torn ends turned whole again. The separated threads became connected to the rest of the pattern once more. Thousands upon thousands of ethereal strings moved in unison, their motions full of strange symmetry and grace. Watching the beautiful weave restore itself filled Sonny with a deep feeling of satisfaction. He smiled.
This feels right. This feels fated.
He continued to pour essence into the ancient armor and watched as it slowly returned to its intended state. Something was pulling him to funnel more in. He couldn't put words to it, aside from him just knowing what to do, deep down in his bones. And then, it was finally whole once again. With a content sigh, Sonny removed his hands from the breastplate of the onyx armor and retrieved the shadow essence back into his body. He let himself sink into his seat, still kneeling on the floor. He wasn't completely drained because he could feel the energy use that his work had taken. It wasn't enough to knock him out, but it was powerful. After the memory turned back into stone, he dismissed it. After that, not wasting any time, Sonny dove into the soul sea. He walked to stand between the two shadow cores and summoned the memory down. As soon as the silhouette of the ancient armor appeared from the sphere of light, he glanced at the runes surrounding it. Sonny muttered to himself,
Come on, be good, be great. I've waited for this moment for so long.
He read the first string of runes. Memory, mantle of the underworld.
Whoa, that sounds awesome. But underworld? That word again.
One of the Marble Saint's abilities was called Underworld Armament. Her own runes also described the creator of the living statues as residing in the cavernous halls of a dark domain, as well as being the last child of the unknown.
Was the saint made by the ruler of the underworld or something?
Sonny shivered slightly, then glanced at the intricate black armor with a solemn expression. Well, if her creator was indeed one of the seven daemons, and sibling to Weaver, the demon of fate, then ruling the underworld might not have been out of the question. Shaking his head, Sonny returned to reading the runes. Memory rank, Ascended. Memory tier, 6. Memory type, Armor. Memory description. Vowing to never look upon the goddess of the black skies again, the prideful demon retreated into the darkness beneath an unassailable mountain chain. He wasn't the first to lead his army against the gods. However, he was the first to shed their blood, as well as learn the secrets of his own.
Led an army against the gods.
When Teacher Julius mentioned that daemons had enough power to wage war against the heavens, Sonny had thought of it as a figure of speech, but maybe it was not. Perhaps a few of them had really tried. And what was that about the secrets of the blood?
Endless questions, like always.
Shaking his head again, Sonny turned away from the description and continued to read. Memory enchantments. Living stone. Feather of truth. Stalwart. Underworld armament. Prince of the underworld. Sonny stared at the long list of enchantments for a while, his heart beating wildly in his chest.
It can't be.
Living stone attribute description. This armor can repair itself while being worn. Feather of truth attribute description. The weight of this armor can be changed at will. Stalwart attribute description. This armor provides extremely high protection against physical attacks, high protection against elemental attacks, and moderate amount of protection against mind and soul attacks. Underworld armament. Attribute description. This armor can accommodate a charm memory to inherit and enhance its enchantments. Prince of the Underworld. Attribute description. This armor grows stronger according to the number of opponents its wielder defeats. Vanquished foes, 1,213 out of 6,000. Sonny remained silent for a while. His dark room, which was situated deep underground, was silent for a long time. After a while, he shifted slightly and said in a low voice,
Well, I'll be damned.
Sonny sat in the darkness for a while, thinking. At first, he wanted to put on his new magnificent onyx armor immediately, but then dismissed that idea. There would be time later. For now, he was too tired. The effects of the stimulant were slowly wearing off, and he had spent too much shadow essence already. He did, however, note a few things about the mantle of the underworld. The first fact he noticed was that it shared 2 enchantments with the Marble Saint. However, there were subtle but important differences between the versions of Stalwart and Underworld armament possessed by the Onyx armor and the Taciturn Demon. The memory offered better protection against physical and elemental attacks, but lacked the complete immunity to mind and soul attacks, possessing a moderate amount of protection against those rare and fearsome types of damage instead. Overall, this was an advantageous trade-off, since most nightmare creatures relied on more common ways of destroying Awakened. Unless they didn't. The more interesting difference, however, was hidden in the description of the Underworld armament. While Saint's armor could accommodate a charm memory to inherit its enchantments, the mantle of the Underworld could both inherit and enhance them. Just one word made so much of a difference. Sonny couldn't wait to explore this subtle trait of his new memory. Living Stone and Feather of Truth, meanwhile, were pretty obvious. That didn't mean, however, that these enchantments did not have a lot to offer. He could already see many interesting ways to apply both in battle. The downside was that both were active enchantments, and as such would require a constant flow of essence to function. What's worse, the armor couldn't even be used without activating the first one. But the most interesting enchantment was, without a doubt, Prince of the Underworld.
A growing memory.
Pondering about that strange and miraculous enchantment, Sonny couldn't help but think about the first Lord of the Bright Castle, who had supposedly been the first master of the Mantle of the Underworld. What tier and rank was the onyx armor when he had first found it? How many of the vanquished foes had been defeated by his hand? Was the Mantle of the Underworld one of the reasons for his legendary achievements? For the longest time, Sonny had wondered about how an ascended memory of the 6th tier had ended up in the hands of humans in the Dark City. It had to have come from destroying a fallen terror, or so he thought. Now there were other possibilities, but all these questions were doomed to be left unanswered. The First Lord and his companions had taken the answers with them to the grave. Remembering the lonely remembrance stones left at the Hollow Mountains, Sonny sighed. Then his thoughts wandered to something else.
The goddess of the black skies. Storm God?
Teacher Julius had described Storm God as being the deity of the depths, of the oceans, of darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster. He also said that the gender of the gods was subject to change. Stars, darkness, and storms were somewhat related to black skies. Frowning, Sonny remembered the runes describing the mantle of the underworld. Indeed, black skies could also be translated as skies covered by storm clouds, or the night sky. Translating the runes reminded him of something.
Opening his communicator, Sonny found a note he made during his conversation with Effie and Kai. There, their true names were written down in runic language.
Nightingale.
Kai's true name was pretty simple to understand, but the spell chose to interpret it rather creatively. Even though Sonny had no idea if the Dream Realm had actual nightingales, the runes described a pretty similar bird, or so it seemed. Translated literally, they meant sings beautifully from the night skies, which could mean either enchanting siren of the night or simply a nocturnal bird. Effie's true name was more straightforward, but also far more morbid. Raised by wolves could mean just that, but a more direct translation had a different meaning. Born from wolves, or born from being eaten alive. Sonny shivered, then deactivated the communicator and closed his eyes for a second. There was one more thing he could do. Summoning the runes once again, he found the description of Weaver's mask and read, "Memory enchantments, mantle of lies, simple trick." But between those two enchantments were 3 question marks. Curious. Now that he was an awakened, he could try to activate the mysterious enchantment marked by those 3 question marks. Even if all of his essence would be only enough to keep it working for a split second, he could. But he was reluctant to. Sonny knew nothing about the enchantment, but from the boundless inconceivable pattern of the mask's weave, he felt that it was somehow connected to eyes, vision, and sight. He suspected that the vile thieving bird was a cursed devil, at least, and it had been driven mad by just one glance at the reflection in Weaver's eye. Would something similar happen to him? There were things, after all, that humans weren't meant to see. Even gods struggled with looking at some truths, it seemed.
No, not now.
Sonny was somewhat willing to risk it, but doing so right now would have been unwise. What if he passed out from shock? That would transport him to a random spot in the Dream Realm, and knowing his luck, that spot would be populated by horrors beyond imagination. With a sigh, he dismissed the runes and took out another stimulant patch.
Some other day, when I am much, much stronger.
With that, he removed the old patch and put another one in its place.
Time to put all that I learned together
And make the final decision.
What should I choose? Stability or danger?
Safer road or an unknown path? 2 days later, Sonny was sitting on a bench opposite the entrance to the Academy Hospital complex with a cup of bitter, dark coffee in his hand. In his other hand, he was holding a slick communicator. Taking a sip of the terrible drink, Sonny grimaced, then lingered for a few moments and sighed. Finally, he pressed the call button to contact Master Jet. She answered after a couple of seconds. Her voice sounded a little tense, and there were strange, barely audible whispers mixing with the background noise of the call.
Awake and sunless. What, wait, give me a second.
Something crackled violently, and in the next moment, the background noise was gone.
Much better. So, have you decided?
Sonny took another sip of coffee and said,
Yeah.
He hesitated for a bit, then added,
As far as joining the legacy clans or the government, I've decided against both. I don't know enough and have no leverage to ensure a good deal. Plus, that option will remain open for me in the future, even if I stay independent for now. The reverse, however, won't necessarily be true. In any case, it's a serious matter, one that should not be decided upon in a span of just a few days while suffering from sleep deprivation and stimulant abuse.
Master Jet turned on the video function of the call and smiled. The smile was bright and beautiful, but Sonny couldn't help but notice that right behind her, something was currently on fire.
Makes sense. So then, Which citadel?
That was the real question. While Sonny decided to remain independent for now, while leaving himself an opportunity to join a powerful faction later, his choice of an anchor was going to limit which factions he would be able to interact with later on. He paused for a moment. He thought about this for a bit, but he was curious as to how Master Jet would react. He finally spoke.
Clan Valor territory.
Master Jet nodded.
Solid choice. Bastion or a smaller citadel?
Sonny drank some more coffee, then spoke the name of the citadel he had chosen into the communicator. Jet's eyes widened slightly. She didn't say anything for a while, then asked with a bit of surprise in her voice,
Are you absolutely sure?
He nodded.
Yeah, I thought about it long and hard.
Master Jet stared at him with a slight frown for a few moments, then shrugged.
Well, okay then, but that might take a couple of days to arrange. That place is very far north, and there are not a lot of saints in those parts. But I'll find a way.
Sonny smiled.
Thanks. I owe you one.
She smiled in response and then winked at him.
Be careful what you say, Sunless. I might just take you up on the offer and come knocking on your door one day, asking for a favor.
He took a sip of coffee and shrugged.
Sure, no problem. Oh, and call me Sonny, please. Everyone else does.
Master Jet blinked a couple of times, then grinned.
All right.
Turning away from the camera, she quickly glanced at something beyond the screen, and then added,
Chained Isles, huh? Good luck, Sonny. I hear it's a real hell.
In the vast, empty darkness, myriads of distant stars were shimmering with ethereal light. The vista of the night sky was boundless and stark, full of promise and mystery. Above it was another sky. This one was blue and bright, full of sunlight and gentle winds. White clouds flowed across it, telling enchanting stories with their movement and shapes. Between the bright sky and the dark sky, an island floated in the air. It was surrounded by freely levitating pieces of rock and ancient masonry, its surface awash in the soft radiance of the sun, its underbelly veiled by impenetrable darkness. Several gargantuan chains stretched away from the island, cracking thunderously as it slowly rose and fell. The clangor of iron was almost loud enough to drown Sonny's voice. Almost.
Ah, drop dead, bastard! Damn you! Crap!
Sonny had a good reason to be screaming bloody murder, because he was seconds away from being eaten alive. Near the edge of the flying island, where the forest covering its surface made way for a narrow expanse of patchy grass, a massive wolf-like beast was currently trying to swallow him whole. The nightmare creature was the size of a small truck, with fur as tough as steel wire and a long, terrifying muzzle. Its jaws were wide enough to bite a human in half and strong enough to crush both bones and armor into dust. Currently, those jaws were trying to close on Sonny, and the only thing preventing them from doing so were his hands. He held the upper jaw of the beast with one and the lower jaw with another, trying with all his strength to keep them open. His muscles felt as though they were about to explode. The abomination was also trying to bite down on him with all of its tremendous might, but for the moment, neither of them could overpower the other. It was just a matter of time, though. Sonny was burning through his essence to augment his physical strength, and those reserves were not endless. When the well of power ran dry, he would lose this contest. He was calculating how long he had when he realized that time was running out. More so if he wanted to have enough energy to continue surviving.
Not good.
About 2 months had passed after he had chosen to come to this place, and now Sonny was starting to seriously doubt his decision. Why didn't he just go to Bastion? He would be safe and sound behind its walls right now, maybe even in the embrace of a beautiful. As though trying to add insult to injury, the nightmare creature interrupted his thought by letting out a deafening growl and doubling its efforts to devour him. Sonny felt a putrid wind brush past his face and grimaced miserably. The stench coming out of the beast's maw was unbearable.
Just don't faint.
His hands trembled, and the terrible fangs of the beast came a few centimeters closer to sinking into his flesh. Sonny gritted his teeth and then yelled,
Saint! A little help here, damn it!
But the taciturn demon was nowhere to be seen. She was a good couple 100 meters away, standing atop a low hill. Sonny groaned and tried to push the jaws of the abomination away, but it was useless. The damn creature was just too strong. A few seconds later, though, something hissed past his shoulders, and two menacing black arrows sunk into the feral eyes of the beast. They arrived almost simultaneously. Sonny was able to breathe a sigh of relief.
Thank the gods.
Using the momentary shudder that ran through the wolf's body, Sonny pushed the jaws sideways, allowed them to close with a loud crack, and poured as much essence as he could into a vicious throw. The massive body of the nightmare creature flew for a good 10 meters and crashed into a trunk of an ancient oak, plowing straight through and turning it into splinters. Sonny fell to his knees and drew in a shaky breath. Then, he quickly glanced back. Far in the distance, a graceful dark silhouette was outlined against the bright sky. The saint held a powerful memory bow in her hands, its form made out of horn and polished black wood. Two ruby eyes burned behind the visor of her helmet, and a crimson coral gem was set into the center of her obsidian breastplate. Sonny nodded to her, thinking,
Nice shots.
She wouldn't be able to help him any further, though, at least not for a dozen seconds. Sonny was pretty sure that the saint had spent all of her arrows while they were fighting with the pack, and now she had to dismiss and summon them anew. At least the leader of the monstrous wolves was now blind. Probably. Not that it was going to stop the bastard. The nightmare creature was already rising from the ground, howling furiously. Sonny gritted his teeth.
Curse you.
Panting, he crawled a few steps and picked up the midnight shard. The austere Tachi was as sharp and deadly as ever. However, the problem was that the last remaining abomination was clearly of the fallen rank, so the stalwart blade was having trouble breaking through its hide. Still, Sonny had to work with what he had. Making sure that the sun was behind him, he stood up and leaned on his sword, watching tiredly as the massive beast turned its ugly head and faced him. The dreadful wolf lowered its muzzle to the ground, then growled with murderous rage. Bits of saliva flew from its maw and fell to the ground. Then, pushing with its mighty hind legs, the nightmare creature lunged at Sonny. Covering the distance between them in an instant, the beast brought its terrible jaws on the tiny human once again and bit on emptiness. In the place where Sonny stood just a moment ago, there was now nothing but air, light, and shadows. Appearing from the nightmare creature's own shadow, Sonny dove between its hind legs and thrust the midnight shard upward, aiming at the soft belly of the fearsome beast. The Tachi pierced the pale skin without much problem and sunk into the flesh of the abomination. As blood poured to the ground, the creature staggered and fell. A low whine escaped from its mouth. Very soon, it was all over. Falling onto the ground in complete exhaustion, Sonny tried to catch his breath and listened to the silence. Soon, he heard the sweet sound of the spell whispering,
You have slain a fallen monster, Dreadwolf. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sonny lay still for a while. then summoned the runes and looked at the dreadful number.
Shadow fragments, 197 out of 2,000.
He groaned. The task of pursuing power had turned out to be much more difficult than he had anticipated. It was for one simple reason. After becoming an awakened, he now received fewer fragments from killing nightmare creatures. Before, he could get 2 by slaying an awakened monster. Now it was 1. Before, he could receive 4 by slaying a fallen monster, and now it was 2. What's worse, his hopes of growing strong by hunting down scores of dormant creatures had been mercilessly crushed, because he didn't receive any fragments from killing those weaker than him at all, which was a real disappointment. Sunny was at the very bottom of the power structure for most of his life. Despite knowing he should be a bit ashamed of the desire, he had been really looking forward to having an opportunity to bully someone weaker than him for a change. But alas, that had turned out to be a waste of his time. Of course, Sunny had also become tremendously more powerful. He could handle himself in a fight with fallen beasts and even monsters, especially with the help of Saint. That was the only reason why he had not fallen off behind Nephis, who was still alive somewhere in the dream realm and growing more powerful with each day. He had not managed to diminish the gap between them by much, but at least he was not worse off than at the start of this. Thinking of changing star, Sunny looked into the distance. A somber expression appeared on his face.
Think about something else.
There was only one bright side to all of this. While dormant creatures did not bring him any shadow fragments, they did bring him memories, and those memories could be fed to Saint. Her own counter now showed
Shadow fragments, 157 out of 200.
Sunny shrugged.
Not bad.
A low, eerie sound of giant iron links scraping against each other interrupted his thoughts. The island Sunny was currently on seemed to have entered the ascending phase, and so his time here was running short. Standing up with a sigh, Sunny summoned the Moonlight Shard and walked over to the corpse of the Dread Wolf. He had to retrieve the soul shards before it was too late. The Chained Isles were a strange place. Situated at the very north of the territories claimed by humans, they bordered the Hollow Mountains. That was one of the reasons why Sunny had chosen that region as his hunting grounds. But it wasn't the only one. The whole region consisted of numerous islands that somehow floated in the air, connected to each other by gargantuan iron chains. It was mostly unexplored, and the awakened population here was not very large. Notably, there were not a lot of masters or saints here, especially those associated with the legacy clans, be they greater or lesser. What the Chained Island had in abundance instead were the nightmare creatures of all kinds, from dormant ones to awakened, fallen, and terrifying corrupted abominations. Each island had its own menagerie of horrors, and the level of threat differed from one to another. Most were utterly deadly, much more deadly than an average awakened was supposed to be able to handle. But Sunny was not an average awakened. To him, this was a perfect hunting ground, a place where he could sharpen his blade without being seen by those who served the sovereigns. Or at least he had thought that way at the start, but now he was starting to suspect that it was more of a place where he could die terribly without being seen by anyone who would have been able to help. Just like Master Jet had said, the Chained Islands were a hellish land. And not only because of the nightmare creatures, the place itself was capable of killing a person. Or rather, its sky could. High above the floating island, there was the usual sky with the sun, the moon, and the beautiful stars that shined brightly at night. However, there was another sky in this strange land, the one that was below the islands. It was always dark, and the ethereal lights burning at an unimaginable distance in its vast expanse only looked like the stars. No one really knew what they were. The only thing that humans knew was that the sky below was seemingly endless, On his first day on the Isles, Sonny had asked what was down there. The answer he received was simple: nothing. Descending into the below was not immediately dangerous, but there was nothing there. Some crazy daredevil had once fought his way through the hunting grounds of nightmare creatures that dwelled beneath the islands and spent a whole week flying straight down. He had to turn back eventually, because out there in the boundless darkness, his mind began to show signs of breaking apart. Even the winged echo he used to descend into the below had almost gone insane. But other than being absolutely empty, the sky below did not seem to pose a threat. Flying above the Chained Isles, however, was rather deadly. The higher one went, the higher the pressure on their bodies grew, and the more crushing their weight would become, until they would either fall down, or their body would simply implode. That was why every human on the Chained Isles knew to pay attention to the sound of rattling chains. Every island in the region went through cycles of ascending and descending, and as they rose too high, the pressure on their surface grew tremendously, to the point where it was impossible to move or breathe. Ideally, Sonny had to get off the ascending island before that happened. He should not have been lingering to retrieve the soul shards from the corpses of the monstrous wolves he and Saint had killed, really. But his eyes glistened with avarice. Soul shards meant money, and if there was one thing Sonny really enjoyed, it was making money. No amount was ever enough, and Independent Awakened like him had a lot of expenses.
Fine, it's fine. I'll be off this thing in no time.
He quickly cut the dead beasts apart and fished out the soul shards from inside their bodies. Hiding the beautiful crystals in his pack, Sonny hesitated for a little, then sent his essence flowing and tossed the first corpse off the edge of the island. He was planning to come back here soon, and leaving so much meat lying around could make the future visit rather problematic. Sonny only had one more carcass to dispose of when he suddenly noticed a swift silhouette descending from the skies. Commanding Saint to hide herself in the shadows, he summoned the Midnight Shard and looked up tensely.
What the hell?
Surrounded by a halo of sunlight, a majestic griffin was quickly approaching the island. At first, Sonny assumed that it was a nightmare creature, but then noticed a human figure on the monster's back. A human rider meant that the magnificent griffin was an echo. Sonny's face grew dim. Very few people could have such an echo on the Chained Isles, and out of those, he was pretty sure that he knew the identity of the unwelcome visitor.